before temples, when humans first looked toward the sky. Take a slow breath, settle into the quiet, and imagine a night so dark that the stars seem almost close enough to touch. There are no cities glowing beyond the horizon, no engines humming in the distance, no electric lights softening the heavens. Only wind slipping through tall grasses, the crackle of a small fire, and the distant howl of something that has every intention of making dinner out of someone else. Above, an ocean of stars stretches across the sky with impossible clarity. For the people gathered around this fire, those lights are not merely beautiful. They are mysterious. They are frightening. They are comforting. They are, perhaps, alive. Tonight, we are not following the story of a single king, empire, or battle. Instead, we are following something far stranger. We are following an idea, one that has crossed deserts, oceans, mountains, and thousands upon thousands of years. An idea powerful enough to inspire breathtaking works of art, astonishing acts of kindness, devastating wars, quiet prayers whispered by lonely travelers, and magnificent cathedrals whose towers reached toward heaven as though stone itself wished to fly. Religion has been called many things. A bridge between humanity and the divine. A guide for moral living. A tool of rulers. A comfort for the grieving. A spark for revolution. A reason to forgive. A reason to fight. Like fire itself, faith has warmed countless lives while occasionally setting entire civilizations ablaze. Humans, being wonderfully complicated creatures, have always found creative ways to turn almost anything into either a blessing or a catastrophe. Our story begins long before sacred books, before temples, before priests wore embroidered robes or monks copied manuscripts beneath candlelight. It begins before writing itself. In fact, it begins so far back that history has not yet started. We are entering prehistory, where stories survive not in ink but in stone, bone, charcoal, and the silent evidence left beneath layers of earth. Picture a landscape during the last ice age. Massive glaciers dominate the northern world. Herds of mammoths wander frozen plains. Woolly rhinoceroses graze beneath gray skies while packs of wolves move like drifting shadows through the snow. Small bands of humans travel cautiously across these enormous wildernesses, carrying little more than sharpened stone tools, animal skins, children balanced on tired shoulders, and memories passed from one generation to another. Life is uncertain beyond anything most of us can imagine. Every sunrise is a victory. Every successful hunt means another few days of survival. Every winter threatens to erase entire families from existence. Disease arrives without warning. Storms appear as though summoned by invisible hands. Lightning splits ancient trees apart. The moon changes shape for reasons no one fully understands. And somewhere within these endless uncertainties, the human mind begins asking questions. Why does the sun disappear? Where do the dead go? Why does thunder roar? Who paints the stars across the sky? These questions may seem simple now, but they were among the first great mysteries our species ever faced. Science, as we know it, had not yet been invented. There were no telescopes, laboratories, or weather satellites. Instead, archaeologists often debate precisely when religion began. It is a surprisingly difficult question. Belief leaves few fossils. You cannot dig up a prayer the way you uncover a spearhead. Yet certain discoveries hint that something remarkable was happening deep within the minds of early humans. One of the oldest clues comes from burial sites. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, some human ancestors appear to have intentionally buried their dead. Bodies were placed carefully into graves rather than simply abandoned to scavengers. Sometimes they rested alongside stone tools. Sometimes animal bones accompanied them. In later periods, red ochre, a mineral with the color of fresh blood, was sprinkled over the deceased. Why? No one knows for certain. Perhaps these burials were purely practical. Perhaps they protected living camps from predators. But many archaeologists suspect something deeper. Careful burial suggests care for the individual even after death. It hints that people believed death was not merely an ending but perhaps the beginning of another journey. If so, then religion may have started not with fear of gods but with love for other people. It is a surprisingly gentle possibility. Imagine an elderly woman who has survived countless winters. She taught children where edible roots grow and how to recognize dangerous berries. She knew which rivers flooded in spring and which caves stayed warm during storms. When she dies, her family cannot bear to leave her body exposed beneath the open sky. They dig carefully into frozen earth, lay her down with treasured possessions, cover her with ochre, and perhaps whisper words that no archaeologist will ever hear. The first funeral. The first goodbye. The first hope that death might not be the end. Across thousands of generations, these hopes quietly spread. Meanwhile, something equally extraordinary unfolds deep inside limestone caves scattered across Europe, Indonesia, Australia, and other parts of the world. Torchlight flickers against rough stone walls. Smoke curls upward into darkness. Artists grind minerals into pigments, reds from iron oxide, blacks from charcoal, yellows from clay. They begin painting. Bison. Horses. Lions. Deer. Handprints. Mysterious symbols. Some caves contain hundreds of paintings layered atop one another across centuries. Others lie so deep underground that reaching them requires crawling through narrow passages for hours. Why venture so far into darkness merely to paint animals no ordinary visitor would ever see? The question has fascinated scholars for generations. Perhaps these caves served as sacred places. Perhaps hunters believed painting an animal granted spiritual influence over the hunt. Perhaps shamans entered altered states of consciousness within echoing caverns, believing they stood closer to another world. Or perhaps humans simply enjoyed making art. The honest answer is that we cannot know. History often whispers instead of shouting. Still, when we stand beneath those painted ceilings today, it is difficult not to feel something profound. Even across 30,000 years, another human being seems to reach through time and say, "I was here. I wondered about this world too." That quiet connection may be one of religion's oldest companions. Wonder. Long before anyone claimed certainty, there was wonder. Among many hunter-gatherer societies documented in more recent centuries, belief centered not upon distant gods ruling from golden palaces but upon spirits inhabiting everything around them. Mountains possessed personalities. Forests listened. Rivers remembered. Animals carried wisdom. The wind itself could speak if one learned how to hear it. Modern scholars call many of these belief systems animism, though the people who practiced them rarely used such labels. To them, the world was simply alive. Imagine waking before dawn. Mist drifts across a valley while birds slowly begin their morning chorus. Every sound matters. Every movement carries meaning. A sudden appearance of ravens might be an omen. An unusually calm river may indicate favor from unseen forces. Even dreams become important messages. It is an intimate relationship with nature. Not domination. Not ownership. Relationship. There is something strangely beautiful about that perspective, especially in an age when many people struggle to remember the names of trees growing outside their own homes. Of course, living so closely with nature also meant confronting its cruelty. A drought could destroy food supplies. A flood could erase an entire settlement. A disease might spread through a family before anyone understood what illness actually was. When terrible things happened without explanation, people searched for meaning. Perhaps spirits were angry. Perhaps ancestors required honoring. Perhaps rituals had been neglected. These explanations offered something incredibly valuable, a sense that chaos was not truly random. Humans have always preferred difficult answers over no answers at all. Enter the shaman. Not quite priest. Not exactly doctor. Certainly not someone whose resume would fit neatly into a modern job application. The shaman occupied a unique place within early communities. They interpreted dreams, performed healing rituals, guided ceremonies, and supposedly communicated with spirits through dance, drumming, fasting, or altered states of consciousness. Anthropologists studying traditional societies around the world have found remarkable similarities despite enormous geographical distances. Different languages. Different landscapes. Yet familiar patterns emerge again and again. The healer. The storyteller. The guardian of memory. The mediator between visible and invisible worlds. Whether spirits literally answered these individuals lies beyond the historian's profession. History records belief rather than proving or disproving it. What matters for our story is that communities trusted these figures. They provided comfort during uncertainty, explanation during tragedy, and hope when circumstances seemed hopeless. Hope is a powerful medicine, even when its exact ingredients remain mysterious. Thousands of years pass. Glaciers retreat. The climate warms. Forests spread across lands once buried beneath ice. Animals migrate into new territories. Human populations slowly increase. Then comes one of the greatest turning points in all of history, not a battle, not an empire, but a quiet revolution growing field by field. People begin planting seeds. Agriculture changes everything. Instead of endlessly following migrating herds, communities remain in one place. Villages appear. Permanent homes replace temporary camps. Grain can be stored. Population grows. Surplus food allows some people to specialize in tasks besides hunting. Potters. Builders. Weavers. Leaders. Priests. And here religion begins changing as dramatically as civilization itself. When survival depends upon harvests rather than hunting, attention shifts toward seasons, rainfall, fertility, and the mysterious cycle of life emerging from buried seeds. Imagine watching a field through spring. Tiny green shoots push through dark soil. Summer transforms them into waves of golden grain. Autumn fills storage jars. Winter strips the landscape bare. Then spring returns, and life rises again. To farming communities, this cycle feels almost miraculous. Death. Burial. Resurrection. Again and again. Many ancient religions soon place enormous emphasis upon fertility gods, earth mothers, sky fathers, rain spirits, and agricultural rituals. Entire festivals celebrate planting or harvest. Songs accompany sowing. Offerings seek favorable weather. Because, frankly, betting your family's survival entirely upon unpredictable rainfall is stressful enough that almost anyone might consider appealing to supernatural assistance. As villages expand into towns, sacred places become more permanent. At first these may simply be special groves, unusual rock formations, or hilltops where ceremonies traditionally occur. Eventually, however, humans begin deliberately constructing monuments unlike anything seen before. One astonishing example rises on the plains of southeastern Anatolia around 9600 BCE. Massive limestone pillars. Intricate carvings. Circular stone enclosures. No evidence of ordinary houses nearby. Today we call this remarkable place Göbekli Tepe. Its builders lived before pottery, before metal tools, before cities. Yet somehow they organized hundreds of workers to carve, transport, and raise enormous stone pillars weighing many tons each. For what purpose? Most researchers believe Göbekli Tepe served as a ceremonial or ritual center rather than a settlement. If that interpretation is correct, then humanity may have gathered to worship before it gathered to build cities. It is a fascinating possibility. Perhaps faith did not emerge because civilization existed. Perhaps civilization partly emerged because shared belief brought strangers together. Religion, in that sense, became social glue. A common story. A common identity. A common calendar. A common purpose. People who believed together could cooperate on projects impossible for isolated families. Stone circles became temples. Temples attracted settlements. Settlements became cities. The seeds of civilization and religion grew side by side, their roots intertwining so completely that separating them would become nearly impossible. The world was changing. And somewhere beyond the eastern horizon, along the winding rivers that would one day cradle humanity's first great civilizations, priests had already begun watching the stars with careful eyes, measuring floods, interpreting eclipses, and telling kings that heaven itself had plans for the earth. Our journey into the age of temples is about to begin. Gods of the first cities. Morning arrives slowly over the broad plains between two rivers. Before the sun has fully climbed above the horizon, mist curls over quiet canals, and reeds sway gently in the breeze. Water birds skim across the marshes before disappearing into beds of papyrus-like grasses. Farmers are already awake. Their sandals sink into damp earth as they lead oxen toward fields that stretch farther than the eye can comfortably follow. Somewhere in the distance, a potter's wheel begins turning. A baker feeds another bundle of reeds into a clay oven. The smell of fresh bread drifts through narrow streets built from sun-dried mud bricks. Above them all, towering over houses that seem almost toy-like by comparison, rises a staircase of stone and brick reaching toward the sky. Not a palace. Not a fortress. A temple. If you had wandered into one of humanity's earliest cities around 5,000 years ago, this would almost certainly have been the tallest building you could see. It was not simply architecture. It was a declaration. The gods lived here. Or, at the very least, this was where humans hoped the gods might be persuaded to pay attention. Welcome to Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, where the Tigris and Euphrates carved fertile paths through what is now much of Iraq and parts of neighboring countries. Historians often call it the cradle of civilization, and while cradles usually suggest peaceful naps and gentle lullabies, Mesopotamia was anything but peaceful. It was a landscape of remarkable invention balanced precariously atop floods, droughts, rival kingdoms, and enough political intrigue to keep historians happily employed for centuries. Yet through all that uncertainty, religion stood at the center of daily life. Not beside it. Not above it. At the center. Imagine standing in the bustling city of Ur sometime around 2100 BCE. The streets hum with activity. Merchants bargain over wool, copper, barley, and precious lapis lazuli brought from mountains hundreds of miles away. Children chase one another between carts loaded with clay jars. Donkeys complain loudly about absolutely everything, proving that some traditions truly are timeless. Above the market rises the city's greatest landmark, a magnificent ziggurat. Unlike the smooth-sided pyramids of Egypt, a ziggurat resembles a series of giant terraces stacked upon one another, climbing step by step toward the heavens. Brightly colored walls catch the morning sun. Priests ascend broad staircases carrying offerings of grain, wine, oil, incense, and carefully prepared meals. Because, naturally, if you believe divine beings controlled the weather, harvests, and survival itself, forgetting to feed them seemed like an unnecessary gamble. The people of Mesopotamia imagined a universe filled with powerful deities, each governing different aspects of existence. There was Anu, Lord of the Heavens. Enlil, Master of Wind and Storms. Enki, associated with wisdom, water, and creation. Inanna, Goddess of love, fertility, beauty, and war, a combination that sounds contradictory until one remembers that human beings have always managed to combine romance and conflict with astonishing efficiency. These gods were not perfect. Far from it. They quarreled. They deceived. They loved. They punished. They rewarded. In many ways, they behaved rather like extraordinarily powerful humans whose moods determined the fate of entire civilizations. For ordinary people, religion was deeply practical. A farmer prayed for rain. A merchant sought protection during long journeys. Parents offered thanks when children recovered from illness. Soldiers begged for victory before battle. Faith was woven into ordinary routines as naturally as breathing. Every planting season carried religious significance. Every successful harvest inspired celebration. Every eclipse demanded explanation. The priests became specialists in interpreting these mysterious signs. Their responsibilities extended far beyond conducting ceremonies. They recorded astronomical observations, managed temple lands, oversaw food storage, collected offerings, organized labor, preserved written records. In some cities, temples functioned almost like enormous economic institutions. Thousands of workers cultivated temple fields, cared for livestock, produced textiles, and distributed food. Religion was not separate from government or business. It was government. It was business. Divine authority legitimized political authority. If a king ruled successfully, surely the gods approved. If disaster struck, well, perhaps someone had displeased heaven. This idea proved remarkably durable. Across countless civilizations, rulers would claim divine blessing because it transformed political power into something far more difficult to challenge. Arguing with a king is one thing. Arguing with the universe itself is considerably more complicated. Fortunately for kings, priests often agreed. Not always, but often enough. As cities multiplied across Mesopotamia, each developed its own patron deity. You are honored Nana, the moon god. Uruk celebrated Inanna. Nippur revered Enlil. The relationship between city and deity resembled that between citizens and protector. If your city flourished, your god appeared strong. If invading armies captured your walls, perhaps your god had abandoned you. Or perhaps another city's god had simply proven stronger. Religion and warfare became closely intertwined. Victorious armies frequently carried away statues of defeated gods as symbols of conquest. To modern eyes this may seem almost theatrical, but to ancient people the loss of a divine image represented profound spiritual catastrophe. Imagine invaders carrying away the physical dwelling place of your protector. The psychological impact would have been immense. Meanwhile, another remarkable invention quietly transformed religion forever. Writing. At first, Mesopotamian scribes scratched simple accounting marks into soft clay tablets. How many sheep? How many jars? How much grain? Practical matters. Taxes rarely inspire poetry. But over generations these marks evolved into cuneiform, one of humanity's earliest writing systems. Soon myths, hymns, prayers, royal decrees, and sacred traditions could survive beyond living memory. Stories that once depended entirely upon oral storytellers now became permanent. Or at least as permanent as baked clay. Which, as it turns out, survived surprisingly well when buried beneath desert sands for several thousand years. Thanks to those patient scribes, voices from the ancient world still speak today. One of the oldest surviving literary works, the Epic of Gilgamesh, tells of a mighty king struggling with friendship, grief, mortality, and humanity's search for meaning. At its heart lies one overwhelming question. Why must humans die? It is the same question whispered beside prehistoric graves tens of thousands of years earlier. Technology had advanced. Cities had risen. Empires were forming. Yet the deepest human questions remained astonishingly familiar. Religion continued offering answers. Sometimes comforting. Sometimes terrifying. Sometimes beautifully poetic. Southwest of Mesopotamia, another civilization was flourishing along a river whose annual rhythm shaped every aspect of existence. The Nile. If Mesopotamia lived with unpredictable rivers capable of sudden destruction, Egypt enjoyed something closer to dependable generosity. Each year the Nile flooded with remarkable regularity, leaving behind fertile black soil ideal for farming. Predictability shaped Egyptian religion profoundly. Where Mesopotamian myths often emphasized uncertainty and divine conflict, Egyptian beliefs celebrated order, harmony, balance, the proper functioning of the cosmos. The Egyptians called this principle Ma'at. It represented truth, justice, stability, and cosmic balance all at once. Maintaining Ma'at became one of the pharaoh's highest responsibilities. Because Pharaoh was not merely a political leader. He was divine. Or at least divinely connected. He served as mediator between gods and humanity. His successful rule ensured that the sun continued rising, crops continued growing, and the universe remained stable. No pressure, of course. Just responsibility for the continued operation of reality itself. Egyptian religion filled the landscape with magnificent deities. Ra sailed across the sky in his solar boat each day. Osiris ruled the realm of the dead. Isis embodied motherhood, healing, and devotion. Horus watched over kingship. Anubis guided souls during burial. Each possessed rich stories explaining not only natural phenomena but also human emotions, family relationships, justice, and hope. Nowhere is Egyptian faith more visible than in their extraordinary treatment of death. To modern observers, mummies often seem mysterious or perhaps slightly unsettling. Hollywood has not exactly helped. The reality was far more profound. Egyptians believed that preserving the body helped ensure survival in the afterlife. Death represented transition rather than annihilation. Imagine entering the Valley of the Kings while funeral priests chant beneath blazing desert sunlight. Workers carefully wrap linen around the deceased. Jewelry accompanies the body. Food, furniture, clothing, games, even favorite possessions fill burial chambers. Walls bloom with colorful paintings depicting gardens, rivers, servants, music, and family reunions. These were not decorations. They were preparations. The dead would need these things again. Religion softened the terror of mortality by promising continuity. Life beyond life. Journey beyond death. Perhaps nowhere illustrates this better than the famous weighing of the heart. According to Egyptian belief, after death a person's heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. If the heart remained light, free from overwhelming wrongdoing, the soul could continue into eternal paradise. If not, a rather alarming creature named Ammit, part crocodile, part lion, part hippopotamus, waited nearby to consume the unworthy heart. Ancient religions certainly knew how to encourage good behavior through memorable imagery. It is difficult to forget moral lessons when they involve being eaten by mythological monsters. Yet Egyptian religion was not built solely upon fear. It overflowed with beauty. Temple columns blossomed like lotus flowers. Sacred hymns echoed through vast halls. Incense drifted toward painted ceilings covered in stars. Festivals filled cities with music, dancing, and public processions carrying statues of gods through cheering crowds. Religion was experienced with every sense. Seen. Heard. Smelled. Touched. Remembered. As centuries passed, trade routes expanded between civilizations. Ideas traveled alongside copper, cedar wood, gold, spices, and precious stones. Religious concepts slowly migrated as well. Gods borrowed characteristics from neighboring cultures. Stories evolved. Symbols merged. Human civilization was becoming increasingly interconnected. Faith moved with merchants. It crossed rivers with travelers. It sailed aboard ships. It entered foreign cities speaking unfamiliar languages before gradually learning local ones. And although every civilization believed its traditions uniquely meaningful, they often shared remarkable similarities. Creation from chaos. Great floods. Sacred mountains. Wise lawgivers. Divine judgment. Hope beyond death. Perhaps these recurring themes reflected shared human experiences rather than direct borrowing. After all, nearly everyone wondered where the world came from. Nearly everyone feared death. Nearly everyone prayed for tomorrow's harvest. Meanwhile, beyond Mesopotamia and Egypt, other great civilizations were awakening. Along the Indus River, carefully planned cities flourished. Far to the east, communities in China honored ancestors whose guidance seemed to bridge past and present. Elsewhere, entirely different spiritual traditions were beginning to emerge, traditions less focused on powerful gods controlling storms and harvests, and more concerned with the inner landscape of the human mind. The search for meaning was about to become even deeper. Because sometimes the greatest journey is not across deserts or seas. Sometimes it is inward, into the quiet places where questions live long after the noise of the world has faded. And in the forests and river valleys of ancient India, that inward journey was about to change world history forever. The forests of India and the search for what cannot be seen. Long before sunrise, a faint ribbon of mist drifts across the wide plains of northern India. The air is cool for now. It will not remain that way for long. Before noon, the heat will press down upon the earth until every stone seems to glow beneath the sun. But in these quiet moments before dawn, the world feels almost suspended between dreams and waking. A river flows gently through the darkness. Somewhere nearby, a peacock calls. The sound echoes through thick forests where banyan trees spread their enormous roots like ancient hands clutching the soil. Monkeys stir high among the branches. A deer steps cautiously toward the water's edge, ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. Smoke rises from small settlements where the first cooking fires of the day begin to burn. A lone traveler walks barefoot along a dusty path. He owns almost nothing. A simple robe. A wooden bowl. Perhaps a walking stick polished smooth by years of wandering. He has no palace waiting for him. No army. No fortune. Instead, he carries questions. Questions that cannot be weighed, traded, or conquered. Questions that have followed humanity since the first burial beneath Ice Age skies. Who are we? Why do we suffer? What happens after death? Can the restless mind ever truly become still? As civilization matured across Mesopotamia and Egypt, religion often centered upon magnificent temples, divine kings, and elaborate rituals performed before statues of powerful gods. India, however, gradually developed another path. Not instead of ritual. Not instead of gods. But alongside them. A path that turned inward. It would become one of the most influential spiritual traditions in world history. To understand how this happened, we must first travel back more than 3,000 years, to a time when groups speaking early Indo-Aryan languages entered the northwestern regions of the Indian subcontinent. They brought with them songs, poetry, sacred rituals, and an oral tradition so carefully preserved that its verses would survive for millennia before being written down. These became the Vedas. Even today, they remain among the oldest continuously transmitted sacred texts in human history. Imagine gathering around a ceremonial fire beneath an open sky. There is no temple surrounding you. No towering stone monument. Only priests, carefully trained through years of memorization, reciting verses with astonishing precision. Every syllable matters. Every pause. Every breath. For generations, these hymns existed only in memory. Teacher to student. Parent to child. Voice to voice. The spoken word itself became sacred. In a world before printing presses, before digital archives, before even parchment was common, memory was one of civilization's greatest treasures. The Vedic religion revolved around sacrifice. Not sacrifice in the dramatic sense modern films often imagine, but offerings carefully performed to maintain harmony between humans and the cosmos. Clarified butter hissed as it touched the flames. Milk. Grain. Soma, a mysterious ritual drink whose exact identity scholars still debate. Smoke rose toward the heavens carrying prayers to the gods. Among these deities stood Indra, mighty wielder of thunder. Agni, god of fire and messenger between humanity and the divine. Varuna, guardian of cosmic order. Surya, the radiant sun. Unlike many later religious traditions that emphasized fixed doctrines, early Vedic religion often felt wonderfully fluid. The divine appeared through many forms. Nature itself shimmered with sacred presence. Rain was not merely weather. Fire was not merely heat. The dawn itself could be praised like a living being. For farming communities dependent upon seasonal rains, this perspective made perfect sense. When monsoon clouds finally gathered after months of blistering heat, bringing life back to thirsty fields, gratitude came naturally. One did not need sophisticated theology to appreciate rain when one's crops had been dying only days earlier. As centuries passed, however, some thinkers began asking difficult questions. Not because the old rituals lacked meaning, but because they wondered whether something lay beyond them. Imagine spending years mastering sacred ceremonies. You know every hymn, every offering, every gesture. Yet late at night, while the fire burns low, another question quietly emerges. What if the greatest mystery is not outside us, but within us? These reflections eventually found expression in remarkable philosophical works known as the Upanishads. Here the tone changes. Instead of asking how to perform rituals correctly, the writers begin exploring consciousness itself. Who am I? What is the self? Is there something eternal beneath our changing thoughts, bodies, and emotions? One famous image compares the human soul to a traveler changing garments. Bodies grow old. Bodies die. Yet perhaps something deeper continues. The individual self, Atman, might ultimately be one with the universal reality known as Brahman. It is an idea at once breathtaking and difficult to explain. Imagine countless waves rising upon the ocean. Each wave appears separate. Each has its own shape, its own movement, its own brief existence. Yet every wave is still the ocean. Different. And not different. Individual. Yet connected. It is the kind of concept best considered slowly. Preferably while listening to rivers rather than checking emails. Unfortunately, ancient philosophers had not yet invented email, so they enjoyed a considerable advantage. These ideas gradually transformed religious life across India. Meditation became increasingly important. Self-discipline. Reflection. Seeking liberation from the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, what became known as samsara. This cycle was governed by karma. Today the word is often used casually, almost as a joke. Ancient karma was something far richer. It described the moral consequences of actions. Choices mattered. Kindness mattered. Cruelty mattered. The universe itself, according to these beliefs, possessed a profound moral structure. Actions echoed across lifetimes. Whether one accepted this literally or symbolically, the underlying message carried remarkable weight. How we live shapes who we become. Not simply tomorrow. Perhaps forever. Meanwhile, cities continued growing. Trade expanded. Kingdoms rose. Wealth accumulated. And with prosperity came inequality. Some questioned whether elaborate rituals truly addressed the suffering they witnessed around them. Around the 6th century BCE, northern India experienced what historians sometimes call an age of spiritual experimentation. Teachers wandered from town to town. Debates filled marketplaces. Ascetics abandoned comfortable lives in search of wisdom. Philosophical schools flourished. It was an extraordinary period. Imagine roads filled not only with merchants transporting spices and textiles, but with thinkers carrying ideas powerful enough to reshape civilizations. Among these wanderers was a prince. Or rather, a man who had once been a prince. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. Tradition tells us he grew up surrounded by luxury. His father hoped to protect him from life's harsh realities. Comfort. Pleasure. Security. Every parent, perhaps, wishes in some small way to shield their children from suffering. History, unfortunately, rarely cooperates. When Siddhartha finally encountered old age, illness, and death beyond the palace walls, his understanding of the world changed forever. No amount of wealth could prevent these realities. Kings grew old. Queens became ill. Children mourned parents. Empires disappeared. Everyone suffered. So Siddhartha walked away. Imagine the silence of that departure. Leaving silk garments behind. Leaving royal meals. Leaving certainty. Choosing instead forests, meditation, and relentless questioning. Years passed. He practiced severe asceticism. Extreme fasting. Rigorous self-denial. Yet eventually he concluded that suffering could not be escaped through indulgence. Or through self-torture. Both extremes missed something essential. So he sat beneath a fig tree. He resolved not to rise until he understood. Whether every detail occurred exactly as later traditions describe lies beyond the historian's certainty. What matters historically is what followed. Siddhartha emerged transformed. People called him the Buddha. The Awakened One. His teaching began with an observation so simple that it feels almost obvious. Life contains suffering. Not because life is always miserable. There is joy, love, beauty, friendship, laughter. There is also loss, illness, fear, change. Even our happiest moments eventually pass. Trying to cling to them creates more suffering. The Buddha proposed a path, not based upon pleasing powerful gods, but upon transforming the mind itself. Compassion, mindfulness, ethical living, meditation, wisdom. His followers formed communities of monks and nuns, living modestly while preserving his teachings. Kings eventually supported monasteries. Merchants funded temples. Pilgrims carried Buddhist ideas across Asia. Over centuries they reached Sri Lanka, China, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, the Himalayas. Faith now traveled not only through conquest but through conversation, through curiosity, through travelers sharing stories beneath unfamiliar skies. Around the same period, another remarkable teacher offered a different answer to humanity's deepest questions. Mahavira. Associated with what became Jainism, he emphasized radical nonviolence. Not merely avoiding war. Avoiding harm altogether. Toward humans. Toward animals. Toward even the smallest living creatures whenever possible. Some Jain monks swept the ground before walking to avoid accidentally stepping upon insects. To modern observers this may seem extraordinary. Yet beneath the practice lies an idea both ancient and startlingly modern. Every life possesses value. Compassion should not stop where convenience begins. These traditions did not replace older Vedic beliefs. Instead, India's religious landscape became increasingly diverse. Ideas overlapped. Influenced one another. Evolved. What later generations would call Hinduism gradually developed through centuries of continuous change rather than a single founding moment. Unlike many world religions founded by identifiable individuals, Hindu traditions resemble an immense river fed by countless streams. Ancient rituals, local traditions, epic poetry, philosophy, devotion, mysticism, temple worship, meditation, all flowing together. Its stories became some of humanity's greatest literature. The Mahabharata, vast enough to dwarf many other epics, explored duty, loyalty, justice, and war. Within it rests the Bhagavad Gita, a dialogue between Prince Arjuna and the god Krishna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. The scene is unforgettable. Armies stand ready. Conch shells echo across the plain. War feels inevitable. Arjuna hesitates. How can he fight those he loves? Krishna's response moves beyond military duty into profound philosophy about action, responsibility, and the eternal nature of the soul. It is remarkable that one of history's most influential spiritual conversations takes place not in peaceful isolation, but moments before battle. Perhaps because humanity often asks its deepest questions when standing closest to catastrophe. Religion in India became something wonderfully expansive. Some sought truth through devotion. Others through meditation. Others through scholarship. Others through service. Many paths. Many questions. Many answers. Not always peacefully, of course. Human beings remained human. Disagreements appeared. Rival schools debated fiercely. Kings occasionally favored one tradition over another. History has never been entirely free from conflict. Still, an extraordinary intellectual richness emerged. Faith became not only something inherited. It became something explored. Questioned. Refined. As centuries rolled onward, caravans carried silk, spices, ivory, and precious stones across mountains toward distant lands. Alongside these goods traveled monks, pilgrims, scholars, ideas. The conversation about ultimate reality had begun moving far beyond India. Far to the northeast, another civilization was developing its own vision of harmony, not through escaping the world, but through living within it with wisdom, balance, and respect. There, beneath the broad skies of ancient China, the living would speak daily with the dead, emperors would rule only so long as heaven permitted, and philosophers would ask a different question altogether. Not simply how to reach enlightenment, but how to build a society where ordinary people might live together in peace. China, ancestors, and the quiet order of heaven. The first light of dawn spreads gently across the yellow river. Its waters are not the deep blue of storybooks. They carry fine golden silt gathered from distant highlands, giving the river the color of warm tea stirred with earth itself. Every spring, the current shifts a little. Every flood leaves behind fertile soil, and sometimes unimaginable destruction. The Chinese would eventually give it a name both respectful and painfully honest. China's sorrow. Because rivers, much like history, have an unfortunate habit of giving life one year and taking it away the next. Villages slowly awaken along its banks. A rooster announces the morning as though he alone has persuaded the sun to rise. Farmers shoulder wooden tools polished smooth by generations of hands. Smoke curls lazily from kitchens where millet porridge begins to simmer over clay hearths. The air smells of damp soil, fresh cut bamboo, wood smoke, morning dew. It is peaceful. At least for now. Several miles away, bronze workers are already tending enormous furnaces. Molten metal glows like captured sunlight as craftsmen carefully pour it into beautifully carved molds. When the bronze cools, it will become ritual vessels unlike anything the world has seen, massive containers decorated with swirling dragons, watchful eyes, and mysterious patterns whose meaning still puzzle archaeologists today. These objects are not ordinary tableware. They are bridges. Bridges between the living and the dead. Because in ancient China, one of the greatest religious responsibilities was remembering those who had come before. Imagine entering the home of a noble family nearly 3,000 years ago. The room is quiet. Candles flicker softly. Incense curls upward in delicate ribbons. At one end of the hall stands a carefully arranged altar holding wooden tablets engraved with the names of ancestors. Food has been placed before them. Wine has been poured into bronze cups. The family bows respectfully. No one expects the ancestors to physically sit down for dinner. Yet everyone behaves as though they remain part of the household. Because, in an important sense, they do. To ancient Chinese families, death did not erase relationships. Parents remained parents. Grandparents remained grandparents. The dead continued watching over the living. Their wisdom deserved respect. Their memory required care. Their blessing mattered. Ancestor worship, a phrase historians often use, can sound strange to modern ears. Worship may even feel misleading. For many ancient Chinese people, these rituals were less about treating ancestors as gods and more about maintaining family bonds across generations. Imagine writing a letter to someone you love after they have passed away. You know they cannot answer in the ordinary sense. Yet writing still brings comfort. Connection. Gratitude. Memory. Ancestor rituals carried much of that same emotional weight. Family became sacred. Not only because it provided practical support, but because it connected past, present, and future into one continuous story. Long before family trees decorated genealogy websites, Chinese households quietly remembered names stretching back through countless generations. It is difficult to underestimate how deeply this shaped Chinese civilization. Respect for elders. Responsibility toward parents. Obligations extending beyond individual desires. These values would become central to Chinese culture for thousands of years. Meanwhile, China's earliest recorded dynasty, the Shang, sought guidance from another remarkable source. Bones. More specifically, oracle bones. The process was extraordinary. Priests carefully carved questions into turtle shells or the shoulder blades of oxen. Will the harvest succeed? Should the king attack? Will rain come? Has an ancestor become displeased? The bones were then heated until they cracked. Those cracks were interpreted as answers from the spiritual world. Today this may sound mysterious. Perhaps even superstitious. Yet these oracle bones hold enormous historical importance. They preserve some of the oldest examples of Chinese writing ever discovered. Imagine asking heaven a question. And accidentally inventing historical archives. History occasionally works in wonderfully unexpected ways. The Shang kings believed they ruled with the support of powerful ancestral spirits and divine forces. Victory in battle. Successful harvests. Political stability. All depended upon maintaining proper relationships with the unseen world. Religion and government, once again, walked hand in hand. This pattern should feel increasingly familiar. Across Mesopotamia. Across Egypt. Across India. And now across China. Civilizations repeatedly discovered that shared belief created shared identity. Faith offered more than comfort. It offered cohesion. As centuries passed, however, the Shang dynasty fell. Another ruling family emerged. The Zhou. Conquering a kingdom is one challenge. Explaining why everyone should accept your victory is another. Fortunately, the Zhou developed one of history's most influential political ideas. They called it the Mandate of Heaven. Unlike the divine kingship of Egypt, where the pharaoh himself possessed sacred status, the mandate of heaven worked differently. Heaven granted authority, but only conditionally. A ruler governed because heaven approved. If that ruler became corrupt, cruel, selfish, incompetent, heaven could withdraw its support. How would people know? Natural disasters, famine, rebellion, military defeat. These became signs that the ruler had lost divine favor. It was, in effect, a religious explanation for political accountability. Kings were not automatically righteous simply because they wore crowns. They had responsibilities. Imagine the implications. Suddenly rebellion could become morally justified. Not because rebellion itself was admirable, but because heaven had already judged the ruler. This idea echoed across Chinese history for more than 2,000 years. Every new dynasty claimed heaven had transferred its blessing. Every collapsing dynasty insisted everything was perfectly under control, which rarely ended well. Human governments have always displayed remarkable optimism during their final years. Meanwhile, ordinary life continued. Children learned family traditions. Farmers watched seasonal cycles. Artisans crafted pottery, silk, and bronze. Markets grew busier. Cities expanded. Yet beneath everyday routines, society faced increasing uncertainty. Wars multiplied. Regional lords competed for power. States fought one another with exhausting regularity. Entire generations knew little except instability. When the world grows chaotic, people begin searching for wisdom. Not merely military strategy. Not simply stronger weapons. Something deeper. How should humans live together? How should rulers behave? Can harmony survive ambition? Into this troubled age stepped a thoughtful scholar named Confucius. He never claimed to be a prophet. He performed no spectacular miracles. He founded no supernatural religion in the ordinary sense. Instead, he became one of history's greatest teachers. Imagine an elderly man walking dusty roads from one state to another. His robes are simple. His beard has turned gray. Students follow closely, listening as he speaks about respect, kindness, education, responsibility, and proper conduct. Confucius believed society resembled an extended family. If rulers behaved honorably, officials served honestly, parents cared wisely, children respected their elders, friends treated one another sincerely, then harmony could gradually spread throughout the kingdom. Notice something remarkable. Confucius spent surprisingly little time discussing heaven itself. He cared far more about how people treated one another here on earth. When asked complicated questions about spirits or the afterlife, he often redirected attention toward everyday ethics. One famous tradition summarizes his attitude beautifully. If we cannot yet understand life, how can we fully understand death? It is a refreshingly humble answer. History does not always reward humility, but philosophy often does. Confucian thought gradually became one of the foundations of Chinese civilization. Education acquired sacred importance. Learning was no longer merely useful. It became a moral responsibility. Government officials would eventually earn positions through difficult examinations based upon classical learning rather than simply inheriting noble birth. The system was imperfect. Human systems always are. Yet the underlying idea, that wisdom and education should guide leadership, proved astonishingly influential. Not everyone, however, believed society should emphasize rules, rituals, and responsibilities quite so strongly. Some thinkers looked instead toward rivers, mountains, clouds, empty valleys. One of the most mysterious among them became known as Laozi. Whether Laozi existed exactly as later stories describe remains uncertain. History occasionally wraps remarkable ideas inside equally remarkable legends. According to tradition, he left civilization riding a water buffalo toward the western frontier. A border guard recognized his wisdom and begged him to record his teachings before disappearing forever. The result became the Tao Te Ching. A tiny book. Barely 5,000 Chinese characters. Yet its influence rivals some of humanity's greatest philosophical works. At its heart lies the Tao. Often translated as, the way. Not a road. Not a destination. More like the underlying pattern flowing through existence itself. Water became one of Taoism's favorite teachers. Water never argues with rocks. It simply flows around them. Patiently. Quietly. Persistently. Eventually even mountains yield. There is gentle wisdom in that image. Especially for people who spend their days arguing on the internet. Taoist thinkers encouraged simplicity. Humility. Balance. Rather than forcing the world into submission, they suggested learning to move with its natural rhythms. There is even a famous principle called Wu Wei. It is often translated as effortless action. Not laziness. Not doing nothing. Rather, acting in harmony with circumstances instead of exhausting oneself fighting against reality. Imagine sailing rather than dragging the boat across dry land. Same destination. Considerably less frustration. Confucianism and Taoism sometimes appeared to disagree. One emphasized social responsibility. The other often celebrated retreat into nature. Yet Chinese civilization eventually embraced both. A person might study Confucian ethics while serving in government. Then retire peacefully to the mountains inspired by Taoist poetry. Human beings, after all, have always been capable of appreciating multiple perspectives simultaneously. Life rarely fits inside neat categories. Meanwhile, another spiritual tradition quietly entered China from the southwest. Traveling along caravan routes that crossed deserts, mountains, and oasis towns came Buddhist monks carrying scrolls, stories, and new philosophical ideas from India. Their journey had taken centuries. The Silk Road transported far more than silk. It carried religions, languages, music, mathematics, art, and dreams. At first, Buddhist teachings felt foreign. Their vocabulary differed. Their assumptions differed. Yet over time Chinese thinkers interpreted Buddhism through familiar cultural lenses. Meditation blended with existing traditions. Art transformed. Monasteries appeared. Eventually Buddhism became one of China's great religious traditions alongside Confucianism and Taoism. Rather than replacing earlier beliefs, it joined an already rich spiritual landscape. 3 teachings. Many conversations. Countless generations searching for wisdom in different ways. As evening settles across ancient China, temple bells echo softly through mountain valleys. A scholar copies classical texts beneath the light of an oil lamp. An old farmer bows respectfully before ancestral tablets. A Taoist hermit watches mist drift between pine-covered peaks. A Buddhist monk quietly recites sutras while travelers rest outside monastery gates. Different paths. Different questions. Yet all seeking harmony. Beyond China's western frontiers, however, another civilization was preparing to ask entirely different questions about gods, heroes, justice, and the nature of reason itself. Across the mountains and seas of the Mediterranean, poets were already singing of immortal beings who quarreled like families, philosophers would soon challenge ancient myths with relentless logic, and one small collection of city-states would leave an intellectual legacy that still shapes the modern world. The story now turns westward, toward Greece, where faith and reason would begin one of history's longest, and most fascinating, conversations. Greece, Rome, and the gods who looked suspiciously human. The sea is calm tonight. Moonlight dances across the dark waters of the Aegean, turning every gentle wave into a ribbon of silver. Small fishing boats rock quietly in sheltered coves while distant islands appear like sleeping giants resting beneath the stars. Somewhere along a rocky hillside, goats settle among fragrant thyme and olive trees. Crickets fill the warm night air with their endless chorus. On the highest point above a growing city, a fire burns before an ancient altar. The smell of roasted lamb drifts upward. Wine is poured carefully onto the earth. A priest raises both hands toward the heavens. Not because the gods are unimaginably distant, but because, in ancient Greece, the gods often felt remarkably familiar. Perhaps a little too familiar. They argued. They fell in love. They held grudges that lasted generations. They made questionable decisions. They occasionally disguised themselves as ordinary people, wandered into villages, and caused spectacular complications simply because they could. In other words, they behaved with all the emotional restraint of an exceptionally dramatic extended family. And somehow, this made them deeply believable. Unlike the majestic cosmic forces worshipped elsewhere, the Olympian gods possessed personalities as vivid and unpredictable as the humans who imagined them. Their home was said to stand atop Mount Olympus, whose snow-covered peaks disappeared into clouds so often that it was easy to imagine another world hidden just beyond sight. There ruled Zeus, Lord of Thunder, King of the Gods, Guardian of Hospitality, Wielder of Lightning, and, according to Greek mythology, perhaps the least reliable husband in literary history. Hera, his queen, spent an astonishing amount of time responding to the consequences of Zeus's romantic adventures. Poseidon ruled the sea with his trident, capable of calming waves or shattering coastlines with earthquakes. Athena embodied wisdom, strategy, and craftsmanship. Ares delighted in the chaos of battle. Apollo governed music, prophecy, healing, and sunlight. Artemis protected wild places and hunters. Aphrodite inspired love powerful enough to launch wars. Hermes carried messages between worlds with sandals that allowed him to fly. Each deity reflected something profoundly human. Love, jealousy, fear, courage, beauty, ambition, grief, joy. The gods explained not only the mysteries of nature but the mysteries inside the human heart. Imagine being a fisherman preparing to sail into uncertain waters. You pause before a small seaside shrine. Perhaps you leave behind a few olives. Perhaps a little wine. Perhaps only a whispered prayer. You know storms arrive without warning. You know the sea has claimed neighbors before. Whether Poseidon truly listens is impossible to prove. But your prayer reminds you that you are not entirely alone beneath the endless sky. Sometimes faith begins with companionship rather than certainty. Religion in Greece rarely demanded strict belief in the modern sense. Participation mattered more. Festivals, sacrifices, public ceremonies, community life. To honor the gods was also to honor the city itself. One of the greatest celebrations took place every 4 years at Olympia. Athletes traveled from across the Greek world to compete in races, wrestling, discus, javelin throwing, boxing, and chariot racing. The Olympic Games were not merely sporting events. They were religious festivals. Before competitions began, sacrifices were offered to Zeus. Temporary truces allowed rival city-states to travel safely. For a brief moment, warfare paused. Not forever. Humanity has rarely managed forever. But even a short peace carried enormous significance. It is worth remembering that religion has inspired not only conflict throughout history, but also moments when enemies agreed to lay down their weapons. History often remembers the battles more vividly than the ceasefires. Perhaps because explosions attract more attention than quiet acts of restraint. Meanwhile, Greek temples began rising across hillsides overlooking cities. Unlike Egyptian temples, which often emphasized mysterious inner sanctuaries, Greek temples celebrated balance, proportion, and harmony. Columns stood with mathematical precision. Marble gleamed beneath Mediterranean sunlight. Every angle reflected careful thought. The temple itself became an offering. Architecture transformed into prayer carved from stone. The most famous still crowns the Acropolis of Athens. The Parthenon, dedicated to Athena. Its graceful proportions have inspired architects for nearly 25 centuries. Even today, despite war, explosions, earthquakes, and the occasional unfortunate decision involving stored gunpowder, it remains breathtaking. Stone, it seems, remembers beauty long after empires fade. Yet something unusual was happening in Greece. Alongside priests and poets emerged another kind of thinker. The philosopher. Rather than accepting every myth at face value, philosophers began asking uncomfortable questions. What is justice? What is truth? Can reason uncover the structure of reality? Imagine walking through the marketplace of Athens. Merchants shout prices. Children laugh. Potters display freshly fired bowls. Nearby, an elderly man with an oddly familiar face stops strangers and begins asking them questions. Simple questions. Annoyingly simple questions. What is courage? What is virtue? What makes a good life? Before long, everyone realizes they may not actually know the answers. That elderly man is Socrates. He writes nothing. Instead, he spends his days talking. Questioning. Listening. Questioning again. His method is wonderfully irritating. He rarely tells people what to think. He simply asks enough questions that they begin thinking for themselves. Not everyone appreciated this. Governments generally prefer citizens who answer questions rather than invent new ones. Eventually Socrates was sentenced to death. Officially, he faced charges of corrupting the youth and failing to respect the city's gods. Whether religion or politics played the larger role remains debated. History rarely separates those two as neatly as textbooks sometimes suggest. His student, Plato, would preserve many of these conversations. Plato imagined realities beyond the visible world. Perfect forms. Eternal truths. Ideas more enduring than physical objects. Another student, Aristotle, preferred observing nature itself. Plants. Animals. Politics. Ethics. Logic. Between them, these thinkers transformed philosophy into one of humanity's greatest intellectual traditions. Notice something remarkable. Religion did not disappear. The temples remained busy. Festivals continued. People still prayed. Instead, faith and reason began sharing the same cultural landscape. Sometimes peacefully. Sometimes uneasily. The conversation between belief and philosophy had begun. It has never truly ended. Meanwhile, beyond Greece, another city was quietly expanding. Its beginnings were modest. A settlement beside the Tiber River. A collection of hills. A people who borrowed ideas freely from neighbors while insisting, with admirable confidence, that they had invented civilization itself. Rome. If Greece gave the Mediterranean philosophy, Rome gave it administration. Roads stretched across continents. Aqueducts carried fresh water for miles. Armies marched with astonishing discipline. Law became one of Rome's greatest exports. Religion adapted as the empire grew. The Romans admired Greek culture so enthusiastically that they largely adopted Greek gods, simply changing the names. Zeus became Jupiter. Hera became Juno. Ares became Mars. Aphrodite became Venus. Hermes became Mercury. It was less a hostile takeover than a remarkably successful rebranding exercise. Roman religion proved wonderfully practical. If another culture possessed an effective god, why not welcome that deity into the empire as well? After all, offending potentially powerful supernatural beings simply because they came from another country seemed unnecessarily risky. Temples multiplied. Local traditions survived. Foreign cults spread through bustling cities. Merchants carried beliefs alongside spices and silk. Religious diversity flourished across the empire. One particularly influential mystery religion centered upon Mithras, a figure associated with loyalty, courage, and salvation. Its followers gathered in underground sanctuaries illuminated by flickering torchlight. The ceremonies remain mysterious because participants guarded their secrets carefully. Historians, unfortunately, dislike secrets. Fortunately, archaeology occasionally compensates. Elsewhere, the Egyptian goddess Isis attracted devoted followers far beyond the Nile. Religion was becoming increasingly international. Ideas crossed borders with surprising ease. Empires made excellent highways for both commerce and belief. Then something subtle began changing. As Rome expanded, loyalty to the emperor acquired religious significance. After death, some emperors were officially declared divine. Living emperors encouraged public rituals honoring their genius, or divine spirit. Participation often functioned more as political loyalty than theological conviction. Burn incense. Offer sacrifice. Demonstrate allegiance. Simple enough. Unless your religious convictions forbade it. For most Romans, adding another ceremony posed little difficulty. The empire already contained countless gods. One more hardly upset the balance. Yet somewhere in the eastern provinces, within the restless land of Judea, a very different understanding of God had been developing for centuries. One that insisted there was only one true God. One that rejected worship of emperors entirely. At first, Rome regarded this as merely another local tradition. Soon, however, events unfolding in a remote corner of the empire would quietly reshape world history. A child would be born in a province most Roman officials considered politically inconvenient. A teacher would gather fishermen rather than generals. A carpenter's son would speak about loving enemies instead of conquering them. And an empire built upon military power would eventually find itself transformed by a faith that began among the poor, the forgotten, and the powerless. The conversation between religion and empire was about to enter an entirely new chapter. One that would echo across the world for the next 2,000 years. One God, one covenant, and a people who refuse to forget. The desert becomes cold long before dawn. During the day, the sun has scorched every stone until the air itself seemed to shimmer. But now the heat has vanished almost as quickly as it arrived. Wind whispers across empty hills, carrying grains of sand that quietly reshape the landscape while no one is watching. Above, the stars are astonishingly bright. There are so many of them. Without cities to drown out the night, the sky feels less like a ceiling and more like an endless sea stretching beyond imagination. A shepherd watches over sleeping sheep beside a small fire. The flames crackle softly. The silence is immense. In places like this, surrounded by vastness, it becomes easier to understand why ancient people so often felt that someone, or something, might be listening. Our story now leaves behind the marble temples of Greece and the sprawling roads of Rome. We travel instead to a comparatively small stretch of land linking Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean. Strategically, it was enormously important. Politically, it was almost always contested. Empires marched through it with exhausting regularity. Egyptians, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans. Each left footprints. Some left ruins. Some left scars. Yet despite centuries of conquest, the people living here developed one of history's most influential religious traditions. Unlike the great civilizations we have already visited, whose worlds overflowed with many gods governing different aspects of existence, ancient Israel gradually embraced a startlingly different idea. There was only one God. Not the greatest among many. Not the local protector of one city. One. Creator of heaven and earth. Lord over every nation. Every king. Every mountain. Every sea. It is difficult today to appreciate how revolutionary this concept became. Imagine standing in an ancient marketplace where merchants from dozens of cultures have gathered. One traveler offers thanks to the god of storms. Another honors the goddess of fertility. Someone else burns incense to a local mountain spirit. A sailor whispers a prayer to the protector of the sea. Then one family quietly insists. None of those gods rule the world. There is only one. It was an extraordinary claim. The origins of ancient Israel remain the subject of lively discussion among historians and archaeologists. Some details preserved in later sacred texts are difficult to verify independently. Others align more comfortably with archaeological evidence. History and faith, while often traveling together, sometimes ask different kinds of questions. Faith asks what events mean. History asks what evidence survives. Both conversations matter, though they do not always arrive at identical destinations. According to the Hebrew Bible, the story begins with a man named Abraham. He is called away from his homeland by God and promised descendants as numerous as the stars overhead. Imagine that promise. An elderly man standing beneath the endless night sky. The stars are beyond counting. The future is impossible to imagine. Yet somehow hope takes root. Whether viewed as history, sacred tradition, or both, the story introduces one of Judaism's central themes. A covenant. Not merely belief. A relationship. A promise binding God and people together through mutual commitment. Throughout history, covenants would become more than religious ideas. They would shape identity itself. Generations later comes another defining story. Moses. The Exodus. Liberation from slavery in Egypt. The crossing of the sea. The giving of the law at Mount Sinai. Few narratives have influenced human civilization more profoundly. Even beyond Judaism, these stories became symbols of freedom for countless later generations. Enslaved people. Political reformers. Civil rights leaders. All would eventually look back upon the Exodus as a powerful reminder that oppression need not last forever. Whether every detail unfolded exactly as later traditions describe remains debated among scholars. Yet the influence of the story itself is undeniable. Sometimes ideas change history even when historians continue debating their earliest chapters. At Sinai, according to tradition, the covenant deepened. Laws were given. Not simply rituals. Laws governing justice. Compassion. Family. Property. Rest. Care for strangers. Responsibility toward the poor. Among the most famous came the Ten Commandments. Simple. Direct. Profound. They addressed worship, honesty, violence, family relationships, and truthfulness. Many legal systems throughout history would later draw inspiration from these moral foundations. What made these laws especially remarkable was their scope. The covenant did not concern kings alone. Nor priests alone. Ordinary people mattered. Farmers. Widows. Children. Foreigners living among the community. Justice became everyone's concern. Of course, living according to lofty ideals has never been especially easy. Human beings have a long and rather well-documented history of knowing the right thing to do, and then enthusiastically choosing something else. Ancient Israel proved no exception. The Hebrew Bible tells repeated stories of faithfulness followed by forgetfulness, reform followed by decline, hope followed by failure. Kings rose, kings fell, prophets appeared, warnings went unheeded. If the narrative feels repetitive, perhaps that is because humanity itself tends to be repetitive. We learn, we forget, we learn again. One remarkable feature of Israelite religion was the role of the prophets. Unlike priests, whose primary responsibilities centered upon worship and sacrifice, prophets challenged society itself. Imagine walking into a royal palace. The king sits surrounded by advisors. Military officers stand nearby. Courtiers nod approvingly at every royal opinion. Then an elderly prophet enters wearing rough clothing from the wilderness. Instead of flattering the king, he says, "You have forgotten justice. You exploit the poor. You have become arrogant. This cannot continue." History suggests that kings rarely enjoy hearing such speeches. The prophets were often unpopular. Some were ignored. Some were imprisoned. Some faced threats far worse. Yet their words endured. Isaiah spoke of hope during crisis. Jeremiah wept over Jerusalem's coming destruction. Amos thundered against corruption, insisting that worship meant little if justice disappeared. One of Amos's most memorable images still resonates today. Let justice roll down like waters. Not trickle. Not occasionally appear. Roll down. Like a mighty river. The prophets insisted that religion without compassion became empty ritual. Sacrifices alone could not compensate for cruelty. Prayers could not replace honesty. Faith required action. It was a demanding vision. Perhaps that explains why it has remained influential for so long. Then came catastrophe. In 586 BCE, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II captured Jerusalem. The temple, the center of Jewish worship, was destroyed. Its treasures carried away. Much of the population entered exile in Babylon. Imagine the silence afterward. Smoke still rising from ruined walls. Families separated. Priests without a temple. Psalms left unsung. Everything that had seemed permanent suddenly vanished. Many civilizations collapsed under similar disasters. Some disappeared almost entirely. Yet Judaism did something extraordinary. It adapted. Without the temple, worship increasingly centered upon prayer, study, and community. Sacred writings acquired even greater importance. Memory became survival. Imagine parents telling ancient stories to children born far from Jerusalem. We remember who we are. We remember where we came from. We remember our covenant. Exile transformed identity. A people without political independence discovered they could remain united through shared faith and shared memory. This would become one of Judaism's greatest strengths. Empires came and went. Babylon eventually fell to Persia. Persia later yielded to Alexander the Great. His empire fragmented. Rome arrived. Yet Jewish identity endured. Not because circumstances were easy. They rarely were. But because traditions traveled wherever families traveled. The temple itself was eventually rebuilt after the Persians allowed many exiles to return. Jerusalem once again became a religious center. Pilgrims gathered. Festivals resumed. Sacrifices returned. Hope flourished. Still, the memory of exile remained. History had taught painful lessons. Nothing earthly lasted forever. Only the covenant endured. As centuries passed, Jewish communities encountered new cultures. Greek philosophy. Persian ideas. Roman administration. Some embraced elements of surrounding civilizations. Others resisted fiercely. Debates multiplied. How should one remain faithful while living inside vast multicultural empires? It was not merely a religious question. It was deeply practical. Many minority communities throughout history would ask the same thing. How do we preserve identity without withdrawing entirely from the world? The answers varied. Some emphasized strict observance. Others welcomed careful adaptation. The conversation continues even today. By the 1st century BCE, Judea stood under Roman control. Roman governors collected taxes. Roman soldiers patrolled roads. Roman politics shaped daily life. Many Jews longed for deliverance. Some expected a king. Others anticipated a prophet. Still others hoped. Expectations filled the air like the gathering pressure before a storm. Few imagined what would happen next. Not because nothing significant appeared likely, but because history often hides its greatest turning points in remarkably ordinary places. In a province most Roman officials considered little more than another troublesome frontier. A child would be born. Not in a palace. Not among senators. Not beneath triumphal arches. But in humble surroundings that seemed entirely unremarkable to the empire watching over them. Rome barely noticed. History, however, was quietly changing direction. The next chapter would tell the story of a small movement that began with fishermen, tax collectors, laborers, and wandering teachers. A movement that would survive persecution, outlive emperors, transform the Roman Empire itself, and eventually spread across nearly every continent on Earth. And like so many stories before it, it would begin with hope spoken softly into a troubled world. The carpenter's son and the empire that could not ignore him. The road from Jerusalem to Galilee is quiet before sunrise. Dust lies undisturbed across the worn stones. Olive trees cast long shadows in the pale morning light, their twisted trunks bearing witness to generations of travelers who have passed beneath their branches. Shepherds guide sleepy flocks toward fresh pasture while women balance clay jars on their shoulders, walking steadily toward village wells. The world appears ordinary. Almost disappointingly ordinary. No trumpets announce that history is about to change. No mountain trembles. No emperor awakens from a prophetic dream. Rome continues governing its vast empire with confident efficiency. Tax collectors count coins. Soldiers polish armor. Merchants haggle over grain prices. Somewhere in the capital, senators argue passionately about politics, convinced, as politicians often are, that their debates represent the center of the universe. They are mistaken. Far away, in a province many Romans considered troublesome but ultimately insignificant, a movement is beginning that will one day outlast the empire itself. It starts not with an army. Not with a revolution. But with a teacher. The historical evidence for Jesus of Nazareth is stronger than many people realize. While religious beliefs about his identity differ profoundly, most historians agree that he existed, lived in Roman Judea during the 1st century, gathered followers, preached throughout Galilee and Jerusalem, and was executed by crucifixion under the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. History can speak with confidence about those broad outlines. Faith speaks to what they ultimately mean. Our task tonight is to walk gently between those conversations. Imagine a small village workshop. The smell of freshly cut cedar fills the air. Wood shavings gather beneath rough benches. Sunlight slips through narrow windows while hammers strike rhythmically against timber. It is simple work. Honest work. No one here imagines that the quiet craftsman shaping wooden beams will one day become one of the most influential figures in human history. History enjoys disguising its greatest surprises. By the time Jesus begins traveling through Galilee, Judea is a land heavy with expectation. Roman occupation weighs upon daily life. Taxes burden ordinary families. Political tensions simmer beneath the surface. Different Jewish groups offer different visions of hope. The Pharisees emphasize careful observance of the law. The Sadducees maintain influence through the temple priesthood. The Essenes withdraw into isolated communities seeking purity. The Zealots dream of armed resistance against Rome. Each believes they understand the proper path forward. Then comes this wandering teacher. He possesses no political office, no military command, no wealth. Instead, he tells stories. Simple stories. A farmer scattering seeds. A shepherd searching for one lost sheep. A father welcoming home a wayward son. A traveler helping an injured stranger. The stories seem ordinary. Yet they quietly overturn assumptions about power, mercy, and justice. Jesus speaks about what he calls the kingdom of God. Not a kingdom marked by fortified walls or conquering armies. Something deeper. A transformed way of living. Love your neighbor. Forgive your enemies. Care for the poor. Welcome the outsider. Blessed are the peacemakers. These teachings challenge listeners then. And they continue challenging people now. It is one thing to admire forgiveness as an idea. It is another to practice it when someone has genuinely wronged you. Human beings have always found revenge considerably easier than mercy. Jesus gathers followers from unexpected places. Fishermen leave their nets. A tax collector joins the group despite belonging to one of the least popular professions imaginable. Some occupations, it seems, have struggled with public relations for thousands of years. Women travel among the disciples as well, supporting the movement and becoming some of its earliest witnesses. The crowds grow. Villages fill with curious listeners. Some believe. Some doubt. Others simply wonder what all the excitement is about. Religious authorities begin paying closer attention. Not necessarily because every teaching is new. Many ideas about compassion, justice, and faithfulness already existed within Jewish tradition. Rather, Jesus speaks with unusual authority. He challenges hypocrisy. He criticizes religious leaders when they prioritize appearances over compassion. He heals the sick, according to the gospel accounts. He shares meals with those respectable society often avoids. This unsettles established expectations. Religion, throughout history, often finds itself wrestling with an uncomfortable question. Is holiness found primarily in separation? Or in compassion? Communities have answered that question differently across centuries. During one memorable visit to Jerusalem, Jesus enters the temple. The city is crowded with pilgrims celebrating Passover. Animals for sacrifice fill the courtyards. Money changers exchange foreign coins for currency acceptable within the temple. Business is thriving. According to the Gospels, Jesus overturns the tables of the money changers, condemning corruption and exploitation within a place meant for worship. Whether every detail unfolded exactly as later described remains debated. Yet the episode captures something important. Religious institutions, like every human institution, can drift away from their ideals. Reformers rarely become popular by pointing this out. The political situation grows increasingly tense. Rome values stability above almost everything else. Large crowds. Religious excitement. Talk of kingdoms. Messianic expectations. These ingredients have caused rebellions before. Roman officials are not eager to repeat the experience. Eventually Jesus is arrested. Tried. Condemned. Crucifixion is not merely execution. It is public warning. Rome uses it deliberately. Victims die slowly before watching crowds. The message is unmistakable. This is what happens to those who threaten imperial order. Imagine the silence among the disciples afterward. The teacher is gone. Dreams appear shattered. Fear replaces confidence. Some hide. Others flee. Movements centered upon charismatic leaders usually collapse when the leader dies. History offers many examples. Christianity does not. According to Christian belief, everything changes with the resurrection. Historians can confidently state that Jesus' followers sincerely believed they encountered him alive after his death. That conviction transformed frightened disciples into bold preachers willing to face imprisonment and execution. Whether the resurrection occurred as a historical miracle belongs to faith rather than historical methodology. What history can observe is its astonishing impact. Something convinced these followers that death had not ended the story. Within weeks they are publicly preaching in Jerusalem. Within decades communities appear throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Merchants carry the message across trade routes. Travelers repeat stories from village to village. Letters circulate between growing congregations. One of Christianity's most influential early figures never met Jesus during his earthly ministry. His name is Paul the Apostle. Originally known for opposing the new movement, Paul experiences a dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus. Afterward he becomes its greatest missionary. Imagine him sailing across the Mediterranean despite storms, shipwrecks, imprisonment, and relentless travel. He establishes communities in cities stretching from modern Turkey to Greece and eventually Rome itself. His letters become some of Christianity's earliest surviving documents. Remarkably, Paul argues that the movement is not limited to one ethnic community. Gentiles may join without first becoming Jewish. This decision proves historically enormous. Christianity begins spreading rapidly across the diverse populations of the Roman Empire. Cities become its natural habitat. Corinth, Ephesus, Antioch, Alexandria, Rome. Within each city, believers gather quietly in private homes. There are no magnificent churches yet. No towering cathedrals. Only ordinary rooms. Shared meals. Prayers. Scripture readings. Songs. Communities caring for widows, orphans, the sick, and the poor. Part of Christianity's appeal lies precisely here. The Roman world is deeply unequal. Great wealth exists beside crushing poverty. Slavery is widespread. Infant mortality is heartbreaking. Disease arrives regularly. Life is fragile. Christian communities offer belonging. Mutual support. Hope extending beyond death. These promises resonate deeply. Especially among those possessing little worldly power. Not everyone welcomes the new faith. Rumors spread. Misunderstandings multiply. Because Christians refuse to sacrifice to the emperor's divine spirit, some accuse them of disloyalty. Others misunderstand private religious gatherings and invent sensational stories. Fear often grows wherever understanding remains absent. Periods of persecution follow. Their severity varies considerably depending upon the emperor and local authorities. Contrary to popular imagination, Christians are not hunted continuously for 3 centuries. The reality is more complicated. Long stretches of relative peace alternate with episodes of intense repression. Some believers are imprisoned. Some executed. Others quietly continue practicing their faith. Martyrdom acquires profound significance. Imagine standing inside a Roman arena. Thousands fill the seats. The crowd roars. Officials demand one simple act. Burn incense to the emperor. Offer sacrifice. Walk away alive. Some comply. Others refuse. Not because they seek death, but because they believe worship belongs to God alone. Whether one shares their convictions or not, their courage leaves a lasting impression. Stories of martyrs circulate widely. Ironically, attempts to destroy the movement often strengthen it. The more authorities suppress Christianity, the more people become curious about the faith inspiring such extraordinary loyalty. History occasionally possesses a sense of irony. Empires spend enormous resources trying to eliminate ideas, only to discover ideas travel far more lightly than armies. Then, early in the 4th century, the unimaginable happens. A Roman emperor embraces Christianity. Constantine the Great rises to power after years of civil war. According to later Christian tradition, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge he experiences a vision connected with the Christian symbol of the cross. Whether understood literally, symbolically, or politically, the consequences prove immense. In 313 CE, Constantine and his co-emperor issue the Edict of Milan, granting legal toleration to Christianity. Persecution largely ends. Churches may own property. Christians worship openly. Within a few generations, the once persecuted movement becomes closely intertwined with imperial power. It is one of history's greatest reversals. The religion of fishermen now advises emperors. House churches become basilicas. Simple meeting places become magnificent cathedrals. Bishops influence politics. Councils gather to debate theology. The relationship between faith and power grows increasingly complicated. Power protects religion. Power also tempts religion. The two have been negotiating their relationship ever since. One important gathering, the First Council of Nicaea, seeks to settle theological disputes about the nature of Christ. The debates are passionate, complex, sometimes surprisingly heated. History reminds us that people who agree on 99% of something can argue with astonishing energy about the remaining 1%. Yet these discussions shaped Christian doctrine for centuries. As the 4th century draws toward its close, Christianity spreads across the empire with remarkable speed. Pagan temples gradually decline. Some traditions disappear. Others survive by adapting. Ancient festivals acquire new meanings. Old sacred places become new places of worship. History rarely replaces one world overnight. It layers new stories upon older foundations. The Roman Empire itself, however, is beginning to weaken. Political instability grows. Economic pressures mount. Foreign invasions increase. The empire that once seemed eternal is approaching transformation. As Rome's political power fades in the West, another institution quietly prepares to preserve knowledge, organize communities, and carry faith through centuries of uncertainty. Monasteries, scriptoria, pilgrims, missionaries. The medieval world is waiting just beyond the horizon. And religion is about to become not merely a source of personal belief, but one of the principal architects of an entirely new civilization. The crescent rises, Islam and the transformation of the ancient world. Night settles softly over the Arabian desert. The heat of the day fades almost as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind cool air that drifts across endless dunes. Sand shifts quietly beneath a gentle wind, erasing footprints almost as soon as they are made. Above, the sky stretches from horizon to horizon, crowded with stars so bright that the Milky Way appears like a pale river flowing through the darkness. A caravan has stopped for the evening. Camels kneel patiently beside stacked bundles of leather, spices, incense, textiles, and precious metals collected from journeys stretching hundreds of miles. Small fires burn low. Merchants share bread, dates, and stories carried from distant kingdoms. Some have traveled north from Byzantine cities. Others have crossed Persian lands. Some arrived from ports where ships sail toward India and East Africa. Ideas travel with them. Languages mingle around the campfire. So do religions. Long before Islam emerged, Arabia was anything but isolated. The peninsula sat at the crossroads of continents. Caravans linked the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. Goods flowed constantly through its deserts. Frankincense, myrrh, silk, ivory, pepper, gold. And wherever merchants gathered, conversations inevitably followed. Many Arabian tribes practiced forms of polytheism. Sacred stones stood beneath open skies. Local shrines honored tribal deities. The most famous sanctuary stood in the city of Mecca. At its center rested the Kaaba. Today it is the holiest site in Islam. Long before Islam, however, it already served as an important religious center visited by numerous tribes across Arabia. Pilgrimage brought commerce. Commerce brought prosperity. Mecca flourished. Yet Arabia was also home to Jewish communities, Christian groups, and individuals searching for a deeper understanding of one God. The peninsula was spiritually diverse. Far more diverse than many people imagine. Meanwhile, two enormous empires dominated the surrounding world. To the northwest stood the Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome's eastern half. To the northeast ruled the mighty Sasanian Persian Empire. For generations these two powers fought exhausting wars against one another. Cities changed hands. Armies marched. Treasuries emptied. Entire regions suffered. When great empires spend decades exhausting themselves, history often creates unexpected opportunities elsewhere. Around the year 570 CE, according to Islamic tradition, a boy named Muhammad was born in Mecca. He entered a world shaped by trade, tribal loyalty, and deep religious diversity. Orphaned while still young, he grew up under the care of relatives. Later he became known for honesty and integrity in business. People reportedly called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy. It is an unassuming reputation. No royal titles. No military victories. Simply trustworthy. History has always needed more people with that description. As an adult, Muhammad often withdrew to meditate in the hills outside Mecca. Imagine standing with him on Mount Hira. The city lies below, quiet beneath the desert night. The wind carries little except silence. There are no crowds. No applause. Only rock, sky, and solitude. According to Islamic belief, it was here, around 610 CE, that the angel Gabriel first revealed God's words to Muhammad. Recite. Those revelations would continue over approximately 23 years. Eventually they were preserved as the Quran. For Muslims, the Quran is not simply inspired writing. It is the literal word of God revealed in Arabic. For historians, regardless of personal belief, the Quran remains one of the most influential texts ever produced. Its impact upon law, language, literature, philosophy, ethics, and civilization is impossible to overstate. Muhammad's central message was simple in wording, yet revolutionary in consequence. There is only one God. Worship Him alone. Care for the poor. Practice justice. Show mercy. Prepare for the day of judgment. The message challenged many existing assumptions. In Mecca, religious pilgrimage supported significant economic activity. Powerful families held influence through traditional structures. Calls for moral reform rarely receive universal applause from those benefiting comfortably from the status quo. Opposition grew. Some mocked the revelations. Others feared social upheaval. Followers faced increasing persecution. History has shown repeatedly that new religious movements often begin on society's margins before gradually reshaping the center. In 622 CE, Muhammad and his followers left Mecca for the city of Yathrib. This migration became known as the Hijra. The city would later become Medina, the city of the Prophet. The Hijra marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar. Not because it was a military victory. Not because it crowned a king. But because it established a community. a society organized around shared faith. In Medina, Muhammad became not only a religious leader but also a statesman, judge, and community organizer. The challenges were practical: resolving disputes, building alliances, protecting vulnerable families, managing relations among different tribes and religious groups. Religion now shaped public life alongside personal devotion. Relations between Mecca and Medina soon deteriorated. Battles followed. The early Muslim community faced moments of desperate uncertainty. At the Battle of Badr, a much smaller Muslim force achieved an unexpected victory. Later came painful setbacks. The outcome remained uncertain for years. History often compresses these events into simple narratives of inevitable success. Living through them would have felt nothing like inevitability. It would have felt frightening, messy, unpredictable. Eventually, in 630 CE, Muhammad returned to Mecca. The city surrendered with relatively limited bloodshed compared with many ancient conquests. The Kaaba was rededicated to the worship of one God. Many Arabian tribes gradually embraced Islam. When Muhammad died in 632 CE, the young community faced an enormous question. Who would lead now? Unlike hereditary monarchies, the transition proved complicated. The first leaders became known as the rightly guided caliphs. Their task extended far beyond administration. The community itself was still defining its future. Within only a few decades, Muslim armies expanded far beyond Arabia. Syria, Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, North Africa. The speed astonished contemporaries. Several factors contributed. The neighboring Byzantine and Persian empires were exhausted after generations of warfare. Arab forces displayed remarkable mobility. Local political circumstances varied widely. Some populations welcomed new rulers. Others resisted fiercely. History rarely offers one universal explanation. Military expansion, however, represented only part of the story. Equally significant was the civilization that gradually emerged. Cities flourished. Trade expanded dramatically. Arabic became a language connecting enormous regions stretching from Spain to Central Asia. Scholars gathered knowledge from Greece, Persia, India, and beyond. Islam encouraged learning in profound ways. The Quran repeatedly invites reflection upon creation. Knowledge acquired religious significance. Centuries later, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad would become one of history's greatest centers of scholarship. Imagine entering its halls. Shelves overflow with manuscripts. Translators work carefully from Greek into Arabic. Others translate Persian scientific texts. Indian mathematics arrives. Astronomers calculate planetary movements. Physicians compare medical observations. Philosophers debate Aristotle alongside Islamic theology. The atmosphere hums with curiosity. This intellectual flowering, often called the Islamic Golden Age, preserved countless ancient works that might otherwise have disappeared forever. It also produced original achievements of its own. Al-Khwarizmi helped lay foundations for algebra. The very word algorithm preserves a Latinized form of his name. Physicians such as Ibn Sina, known in Europe as Avicenna, wrote medical encyclopedias studied for centuries. Astronomers refined observations. Engineers developed remarkable machines. Geographers described lands stretching from West Africa to China. Faith and scholarship often worked together rather than against one another. Of course, no civilization remains free from conflict. Political rivalries emerged after Muhammad's death concerning legitimate leadership. These disagreements gradually developed into the Sunni and Shia branches of Islam. The origins were political. Over centuries, theological differences deepened as well. Their shared foundations remained substantial. Their historical disagreements became equally enduring. Meanwhile, Islam continued spreading through multiple paths. Sometimes through conquest. Often through trade. Merchants carried their faith across the Indian Ocean to East Africa. Across Central Asia. Into Southeast Asia. Many of the world's largest Muslim populations today descend not from military conquest but from commercial exchange and peaceful conversion. A trader arriving with honesty and fairness could become a more persuasive ambassador than an army. Religion has always traveled in many ways. By sword. By book. By ship. By conversation. By marriage. By curiosity. By example. As Islamic civilization flourished, Christian Europe entered centuries often remembered, sometimes too simplistically, as the Middle Ages. Yet the Mediterranean remained deeply connected. Goods crossed the sea. Ideas crossed with them. So did misunderstandings. Tensions slowly increased around one city more sacred than almost any other. Jerusalem. A place holy to Jews. Holy to Christians. Holy to Muslims. Few cities have carried such extraordinary spiritual significance. Unfortunately, places that many people love deeply sometimes become places over which many people fight deeply. The stage was being set for one of history's most famous, and most tragic, series of religious conflicts. The Crusades. Wars fought in the name of faith. Wars shaped equally by politics, ambition, economics, fear, and human complexity. Because history, like humanity itself, rarely allows simple explanations. Jerusalem, the cross, and the crescent, the long shadow of the Crusades. Dawn breaks gently over Jerusalem. The first rays of sunlight spill across pale limestone walls that have watched empires rise and disappear for thousands of years. The narrow streets are still quiet. Shopkeepers have not yet lifted their wooden shutters. The smell of fresh bread drifts from clay ovens hidden within winding alleys. Then the city begins to wake. From one direction comes the ringing of church bells. From another, the call to prayer echoes across rooftops. Elsewhere, Jewish families quietly prepare for the day's prayers, their voices joining a chorus that has never truly fallen silent. Three great faiths. One city. Countless memories. Few places on earth have carried so much hope. Or witnessed so much sorrow. Jerusalem is sacred because it holds stories. For Jews, it is the city of the ancient temple, the spiritual heart of a covenant stretching back thousands of years. For Christians, it is where Jesus taught, was crucified, and, according to Christian belief, rose from the dead. For Muslims, it is the place from which Muhammad is believed to have ascended during the night journey, and where the magnificent Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque stand upon one of Islam's holiest sites. Three traditions. Each deeply rooted. Each carrying profound emotional weight. History has often asked an impossible question. How do multiple sacred stories share the same sacred ground? Sometimes. Remarkably well. Sometimes. Not at all. After the rise of Islam, Jerusalem became part of successive Muslim-ruled states. For centuries, Christians and Jews generally continued living in the city under varying arrangements that differed according to time, ruler, and local circumstances. Life was rarely perfect. Minorities often paid special taxes. Political tensions appeared regularly. Yet ordinary people still traded together. Shared markets. Learned one another's languages. Borrowed recipes. Argued over prices. Complained about the weather. Human beings have always been surprisingly good at living together. Until politics convinces them otherwise. The medieval Islamic world was astonishingly diverse. Walk through the streets of Baghdad during the 10th century. The city hums with life. Booksellers display manuscripts copied with exquisite care. Perfume merchants fill the air with scents of rose, amber, and sandalwood. Doctors discuss difficult cases. Astronomers compare observations of the heavens. Mathematicians solve problems that would eventually influence Europe centuries later. Nearby, Christians, Jews, and Muslims conduct business in crowded markets. Languages mingle. Arabic, Greek, Hebrew, Persian, Aramaic. The world feels interconnected. Far away in Western Europe, however, conditions are very different. The old Western Roman Empire has long since disappeared. Kings rule smaller kingdoms. Castles dominate hillsides. Fields stretch across feudal estates worked by peasants whose lives rarely extend far beyond neighboring villages. The church has become one of Europe's most stable institutions. Monasteries preserve ancient manuscripts. Priests baptize children, bless marriages, comfort the dying, and teach Christian belief. Religion shapes nearly every aspect of life. The calendar itself revolves around holy days. Birth, marriage, death. Every stage passes beneath the shadow of the church. Yet Europe is changing. Populations slowly increase. Trade revives. Pilgrims travel greater distances. Many journey toward Jerusalem, seeking spiritual renewal. Most complete the pilgrimage peacefully. Some encounter difficulties. Stories, sometimes accurate, sometimes exaggerated, spread across Europe describing dangers faced by Christian pilgrims in the Holy Land. Meanwhile, politics grows increasingly complicated. The Byzantine Empire, weakened after centuries of conflict, struggles against the advancing Seljuk Turks. Its emperor appeals to Western Europe for military assistance. The request reaches Pope Urban II. In 1095, at the Council of Clermont in France, Urban delivers one of history's most influential speeches. The exact wording remains uncertain because several versions survive. The effect, however, is unmistakable. He calls upon Christians to aid fellow believers in the East and reclaim Jerusalem. The response exceeds almost everyone's expectations. Across Europe, thousands prepare to leave home. Knights sharpen swords. Peasants sell possessions. Nobles mortgage lands. Families say difficult farewells. Many sew crosses onto their clothing. Hence the name. The Crusaders. It is tempting to imagine the Crusades as purely religious wars. Reality is considerably more complicated. Faith certainly motivated many participants. Some sincerely believed they were performing an act of devotion. Others sought adventure. Land. Wealth. Political influence. Escape from debt. Forgiveness of sins. Human motivation has always been wonderfully untidy. Imagine standing among a column of crusaders marching eastward. The journey itself is astonishing. Thousands walk for months. Sometimes years. Across unfamiliar countries. Through freezing mountain passes. Across scorching plains. Food runs short. Disease spreads. Arguments erupt. Discipline collapses. The romantic paintings rarely include blistered feet or spoiled rations. History usually smells less heroic than art suggests. Some crusading groups commit horrifying violence even before reaching the Holy Land. Jewish communities in parts of Europe suffer massacres at the hands of extremists who wrongly decide that fighting enemies abroad should begin by attacking neighbors at home. These atrocities leave deep wounds that would echo across Jewish history for centuries. Religion, tragically, can become dangerously distorted when fear replaces compassion. The First Crusade finally reaches Jerusalem in 1099. What follows is one of the darkest episodes of the medieval world. After breaching the city's defenses, Crusaders massacre many of its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants. Contemporary accounts, both Christian and Muslim, describe terrible bloodshed. The exact numbers remain debated. The horror does not. History demands honesty here. Faith has inspired extraordinary acts of mercy. It has also been invoked to justify terrible cruelty. Ignoring either truth would leave the story incomplete. The Crusaders established several states in the Levant. Castles rise across the landscape. European nobles attempt to govern lands thousands of miles from home. For nearly 2 centuries, these Crusader kingdoms survived through a combination of military strength, diplomacy, alliances, and constant uncertainty. Life between battles is often surprisingly ordinary. Farmers continue planting crops. Merchants continue trading. Children continue growing up beneath whichever flag happens to fly overhead that year. Most people, regardless of religion, spend far more time worrying about harvests than grand political theories. Meanwhile, the Muslim world gradually unites under remarkable leaders. Among the most respected is Saladin. Born into a Kurdish family, Saladin becomes famous not only for military skill but also for generosity and restraint. In 1187, he defeats Crusader forces at the Battle of Hattin. Soon afterward, Jerusalem returns to Muslim rule. Unlike the massacre of 1099, Saladin's capture of the city is remembered for allowing many inhabitants to leave safely after paying ransom, while others were released through acts of mercy. No medieval conquest was entirely gentle. Yet contemporaries, including many Christian observers, often praised his conduct. History occasionally offers reminders that dignity is possible even during war. Saladin's victories inspire the Third Crusade. Among its leaders stands one of medieval Europe's most celebrated monarchs, Richard I of England. The meeting of Richard and Saladin has become almost legendary. Interestingly, the two great rivals probably never met face to face. Yet they exchanged gifts, negotiated truces, developed mutual respect through intermediaries. Even enemies sometimes recognize honor in one another. The Third Crusade ultimately fails to recapture Jerusalem. Instead, agreements allow Christian pilgrims access to the Holy City. It is a quiet reminder that diplomacy occasionally succeeds where endless warfare cannot. Unfortunately, later crusades become increasingly chaotic. One of the strangest occurs in 1204. Instead of reaching Jerusalem, Crusaders attack Constantinople, the greatest Christian city in the Eastern Orthodox world. They loot churches, destroy priceless works of art, steal relics. The event permanently damages relations between Eastern and Western Christianity. The Crusades had begun partly to assist fellow Christians. They now found themselves attacking them. History has a deeply ironic sense of humor. A rather dark one. Across the Mediterranean, however, another story unfolds quietly beneath the noise of armies. Trade never entirely stops. Italian merchants continue doing business with Muslim ports. Scholars translate Arabic scientific works into Latin. Medical knowledge travels westward. Mathematics crosses cultural boundaries. Ancient Greek philosophy, preserved and expanded by Muslim scholars, returns to Europe through translation centers in places like Toledo. Ideas ignore battle lines surprisingly well. A merchant selling spices rarely pauses to ask whether cinnamon belongs to one religion or another. Knowledge behaves similarly. It travels wherever curious minds welcome it. Meanwhile, ordinary believers continue living side by side in many regions. In cities across Spain, Sicily, and parts of the eastern Mediterranean, Jews, Christians, and Muslims sometimes cooperate remarkably well despite political tensions. Doctors treat patients regardless of faith. Architects borrow artistic styles. Poets translate one another's works. Cuisine becomes delightfully mixed. Civilizations often learn more from one another over dinner than on battlefields. By the end of the crusading era, no side has achieved everything it hoped for. Thousands have died. Fortunes have been spent. Kingdoms have risen and fallen. Memories, both heroic and tragic, remain. Yet something larger has changed. Europe has become more connected to the wider world. Trade has expanded. Knowledge has flowed more freely. Religious identities have grown stronger. So too have suspicions. The Crusades leave behind a complicated inheritance. Not simply hatred. Not simply heroism. But a tangled mixture of faith, politics, courage, greed, devotion, fear, curiosity, and misunderstanding. Which, perhaps, is another way of describing much of human history. As the centuries move forward, Europe itself is about to face a religious earthquake from within. No foreign army will trigger it. No distant empire will command it. Instead, a monk with a hammer, a list of complaints, and a remarkable talent for asking uncomfortable questions will challenge one of the most powerful institutions in the Western world. And Christendom will never be the same again. The hammer on the church door, reform, division, and the search for conscience. Autumn settles gently across northern Europe. The forests glow with gold, amber, and crimson as cool winds carry fallen leaves through narrow cobbled streets. Church bells echo across quiet towns where merchants open wooden shutters and bakers pull fresh loaves from brick ovens. The smell of smoke hangs in the crisp morning air as families gather around breakfast tables before beginning another ordinary day. Nothing about this morning appears unusual. No one expects that a quiet university town will soon become the center of a movement that reshapes an entire continent. History has a habit of arriving quietly. It rarely sends invitations. Our story now enters Europe at the beginning of the 16th century. Cathedrals dominate the skyline. Their towers stretch toward heaven with breathtaking confidence. Sunlight pours through stained glass windows, covering stone floors with rivers of blue, red, and gold. Choirs sing beneath vaulted ceilings so high that every note seems to linger among the arches. For millions of Europeans, the church is not simply a place of worship. It is the center of life itself. Births are blessed there. Children are baptized there. Marriages begin there. Funerals end there. The calendar follows saints' feast days. Monasteries educate scholars. Hospitals care for the sick. Priests preserve local records. Churches feed the poor during famine. The institution reaches into nearly every corner of society. Its influence is enormous. Its responsibilities equally so. Yet enormous institutions, however noble their purpose, have a tendency to accumulate problems over time. Not because every leader becomes corrupt. Many remain deeply sincere. But because power attracts ambition as naturally as rivers flow downhill. By the early 1500s, criticism of certain church practices has grown steadily louder. Some clergy live humble, devoted lives. Others enjoy remarkable luxury. Some bishops oversee multiple dioceses while rarely visiting them. Political appointments sometimes matter more than spiritual leadership. And then there is the issue of indulgences. The idea behind indulgences is more complicated than it is often portrayed. They were not officially presented as simple tickets to heaven. Rather, they related to the remission of temporal punishment for sins already forgiven through repentance. Unfortunately, complex theology and aggressive fundraising make rather uncomfortable companions. Some preachers begin promoting indulgences in ways that leave many believers deeply uneasy. One particularly famous preacher reportedly inspires the saying, "As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs." Whether those exact words were used remains debated. The impression certainly spread. To many ordinary people, it begins to sound suspiciously as though salvation has acquired a price tag. History has repeatedly demonstrated that mixing religion and financial incentives requires extraordinary care. Because humans, being endlessly inventive, occasionally discover creative interpretations that benefit their wallets. Into this growing unease steps an Augustinian monk named Martin Luther. He is not trying to destroy Christianity. Quite the opposite. He hopes to reform what he believes has gone astray. Imagine Luther sitting alone in his study. Candles flicker across shelves filled with handwritten manuscripts. He pores over the Bible, comparing passages carefully. One question refuses to leave him. How is a person made right with God? Is it through purchased indulgences? Through religious rituals alone? Or through faith in God's grace? The question consumes him. On October 31, 1517, Luther sends a document known today as the 95 Theses. According to long-standing tradition, he also nails them to the church door in Wittenberg. Whether the dramatic hammering happened exactly as later remembered remains uncertain. Ironically, the famous hammer may itself have become something of a legend. History occasionally enjoys teasing historians. What matters is that Luther intended to begin an academic debate. He did not expect to ignite a continental revolution. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on one's perspective, the printing press had recently transformed communication. Before Johannes Gutenberg's invention, copying books required painstaking labor by scribes. Now pamphlets could spread with astonishing speed. Luther's ideas traveled farther than anyone imagined possible. Within weeks they circulated across Germany. Within months they reached much of Europe. It was, in many ways, the social media revolution of the 16th century. Only with considerably more parchment. And rather fewer cat videos. Luther argued that scripture should stand above church tradition when the two appeared to conflict. He translated the Bible into German so ordinary people could read it themselves. This proved revolutionary. Imagine hearing sacred texts not in Latin, a language many ordinary villagers could not understand, but in the language spoken around your own kitchen table. Faith suddenly feels closer. More personal. Not everyone welcomes these changes. Church authorities respond forcefully. Luther is summoned to defend his writings. Eventually he stands before the imperial diet at Worms in 1521. The name still causes occasional amusement among history students. Yes. It really is called Worms. History contains many magnificent moments. Creative place names are among them. Before the emperor and assembled leaders, Luther is asked to recant. According to later tradition, he refuses, declaring that his conscience is captive to the word of God. The exact wording remains debated. The courage required does not. Standing against both religious and political authorities seldom promises an easy future. Luther is declared an outlaw. Friends secretly hide him in Wartburg Castle. There, disguised and largely isolated, he continues translating the Bible. Meanwhile, reform spreads. Not uniformly. Not peacefully. Across Switzerland, Huldrych Zwingli develops his own reform movement. Later, John Calvin shapes Protestant thought from Geneva with remarkable influence. England follows an entirely different path when Henry VIII breaks with Rome, creating the Church of England through a mixture of political, personal, and religious circumstances. If there is one lesson the Reformation teaches repeatedly, it is this. Human motivations are rarely simple. Faith matters. Politics matters. Economics matters. Personality matters. National identity matters. Trying to separate them completely is rather like trying to untangle threads from an ancient tapestry after they have been woven together for centuries. The Protestant Reformation transforms Europe. Some regions embrace Lutheranism. Others become Reformed. Some remain firmly Catholic. Religious maps now begin overlapping with political rivalries. Communities once united by common worship find themselves divided. Neighbors argue. Families disagree. Princes choose sides. Wars follow. Too many wars. The 16th and 17th centuries witnessed devastating religious conflicts. The French Wars of Religion, the Dutch Revolt, and eventually the catastrophic 30 Years' War. Imagine Central Europe during that terrible conflict. Fields lie abandoned. Villages burn. Disease follows armies. Famine spreads. Entire regions lose enormous portions of their population. Soldiers march beneath religious banners. Yet political ambitions frequently guide their movements just as much as theology. Religion provides language. Power often provides momentum. Historians sometimes caution against calling these purely religious wars. They are also struggles over dynasties, territory, alliances, and state power. Once again, faith and politics prove almost impossible to separate. Meanwhile, the Catholic Church begins its own profound process of renewal. Often called the Counter-Reformation, or, increasingly, the Catholic Reformation, it seeks both reform and reaffirmation. The Council of Trent meets over many years. Church leaders address abuses, clarify doctrine, improve clergy education, strengthen pastoral care. Religious orders such as the Society of Jesus, founded by Ignatius of Loyola, dedicate themselves to education, missionary work, and scholarship. Jesuit schools soon become renowned throughout Europe and beyond. Knowledge itself becomes part of religious renewal. The age also produces extraordinary art. Walk into a Baroque church. Sunlight streams through hidden windows. Marble seems almost alive. Ceilings dissolve into painted heavens filled with angels and clouds. Music swells beneath towering domes. The experience is designed not merely to inform the mind, but to move the heart. Religion speaks through architecture as eloquently as through sermons. Yet beneath these magnificent achievements lies a quieter transformation. The idea of conscience grows stronger. Individuals increasingly ask, what do I personally believe? Whom should I trust? The Church? The Bible? Tradition? Reason? My own understanding? These questions do not end with the Reformation. They become permanent companions of the modern world. As European ships begin crossing the Atlantic and sailing around Africa toward Asia, these religious debates travel with them. Missionaries board the same vessels as merchants. Priests accompany conquistadors. Pastors establish churches in new settlements. Sometimes they protect vulnerable communities. Sometimes they become entangled with conquest. Sometimes both occur at once. The story of religion is about to become unmistakably global. Faith will cross oceans, meet ancient civilizations, inspire acts of astonishing compassion, and, tragically, sometimes provide justification for exploitation. Because history, faithful to its complicated nature, never allows simple endings. The next chapter begins not in Europe's cathedrals, but upon restless seas, where sails catch the wind and unfamiliar continents wait beyond the horizon. Across the oceans, faith, empires, and the meeting of worlds. The Atlantic Ocean is quiet at dawn. Long swells lift a wooden ship so gently that, for a moment, it feels almost suspended between sea and sky. The sails hang heavy in the still morning air before the first breeze slowly fills them. Salt clings to every rope. Every plank creaks with the steady rhythm of the waves. Somewhere below deck, sailors are already awake. Someone coughs. Someone prays. Someone wonders if they will ever see home again. Life aboard a 15th century ship is uncomfortable in ways modern travelers would struggle to imagine. Fresh water grows stale after weeks at sea. Bread hardens into something capable of winning arguments with stone. Rats become unwelcome roommates. And yet these ships continue sailing. Because beyond the horizon lies possibility. Trade. Fortune. Adventure. Knowledge. Sometimes conquest. Sometimes tragedy. Almost always change. The age of exploration did not begin simply because Europeans suddenly became curious about geography. Curiosity certainly helped. So did improved navigation, stronger ships, better maps, and the desire to reach Asia without relying upon traditional overland trade routes. Economics and ambition often make enthusiastic traveling companions. Religion traveled with them. Not as cargo packed into wooden crates, but inside the hearts of the people aboard. Missionaries, priests, monks, ministers, and scholars crossed oceans alongside merchants and soldiers. Some genuinely hoped to share what they believed was good news for all humanity. Others believed conversion naturally accompanied imperial expansion. Still others found themselves caught somewhere between spiritual devotion and political power. The relationship would prove extraordinarily complicated. Imagine standing upon the deck as land finally appears after weeks at sea. At first it is only a faint green line against the horizon. Then forests. Mountains. Smoke rising from villages. People watching unfamiliar ships approach their shores. For the communities already living there, the newcomers are equally mysterious. Neither side fully understands the other. History is about to become a conversation. Sometimes peaceful. Sometimes violent. Sometimes both at once. When Christopher Columbus reached the Caribbean in 1492, he believed he had arrived near Asia. He had not. Instead, Europe encountered continents already home to millions of people representing hundreds of distinct cultures, languages, and religious traditions. These societies were anything but empty. Across Mesoamerica stood magnificent cities. Temples reached toward the sky. Astronomers carefully observed planetary movements. Priests maintained sacred calendars. The Aztec Empire honored gods connected to rain, agriculture, warfare, and the sun. Ceremonies filled great plazas with music, incense, and ritual. Farther south, the Inca Empire regarded the sun as deeply sacred while weaving religious life into agriculture, government, and family. Across North America, countless indigenous nations possessed rich spiritual traditions rooted in relationships with the land. Mountains carried stories. Rivers remembered ancestors. Animals served as teachers. The natural world was alive with meaning. These traditions had developed over thousands of years. They were not waiting for Europe to complete them. They already possessed depth, complexity, and wisdom. When Christianity arrived, it encountered civilizations with their own answers to humanity's oldest questions. What followed varied enormously. Sometimes missionaries learned local languages, defended indigenous communities, and recorded cultures that might otherwise have disappeared. At other times religion became intertwined with conquest in deeply troubling ways. Spanish conquistadors arrived carrying both swords and crosses. Some sincerely desired conversion. Others primarily sought gold. Occasionally they pursued both simultaneously. Human motivations, as we have discovered repeatedly, remain stubbornly mixed. Among the most remarkable figures of this era was Bartolomé de las Casas. Originally participating in the colonial system, he gradually became one of its fiercest critics. After witnessing terrible treatment of indigenous peoples, Las Casas argued passionately that they possessed full human dignity and deserved justice. He challenged powerful interests within the Spanish Empire itself. His writings remain uncomfortable reading. Not because they exaggerate suffering, but because they describe it so plainly. History sometimes asks us not merely to admire the past, but to learn from its failures. Missionaries often found themselves facing difficult choices. Should conversion require abandoning local languages, traditional clothing, music, architecture? Or could Christianity be expressed through local cultures? Different missionaries answered differently. Some insisted upon European customs. Others embraced cultural adaptation. In parts of Asia, the Jesuit missionary Matteo Ricci provides a remarkable example. Arriving in China during the late 16th century, Ricci did not immediately condemn everything he encountered. Instead, he learned Chinese, studied Confucian classics, wore the robes of a scholar, engaged respectfully with educated officials. He believed dialogue achieved more than confrontation. His approach opened extraordinary conversations between European and Chinese intellectual traditions. Not everyone approved. Some church leaders feared adaptation went too far. Others believed respect strengthened rather than weakened faith. The debate continued for generations. Meanwhile, Christianity also expanded across Africa in new ways. It is worth remembering that Christianity had existed in parts of Africa long before European colonialism. Ancient communities flourished in Egypt, Ethiopia, and Nubia centuries before many northern Europeans themselves became Christian. History rarely follows the simple maps people later imagine. Along the Indian Ocean, Muslim merchants continued spreading Islam through trade. East African ports connected Arabia, Persia, India, and Southeast Asia. In places like modern Indonesia and Malaysia, Islam expanded largely through peaceful commercial networks rather than military conquest. Merchants established trust. Families intermarried. Communities gradually embraced new beliefs while preserving many local traditions. Again we see that religion travels by many roads. Sometimes by armies. Sometimes by teachers. Sometimes by ships carrying spices. Sometimes simply by neighbors sharing meals. Meanwhile, Europe itself was changing dramatically. The scientific revolution began asking new questions about the universe. Astronomers observed planets with increasing precision. Natural philosophers experimented rather than merely repeating ancient authorities. Religion did not simply disappear in response. Many early scientists remained deeply religious. They often viewed scientific investigation as another way of appreciating divine creation. The relationship between science and faith proved considerably more nuanced than popular myths sometimes suggest. Certainly there were famous conflicts. The trial of Galileo Galilei remains among the best known. Galileo supported the heliocentric model, placing the Sun rather than Earth at the center of the solar system. Church authorities feared both theological and institutional consequences. The resulting conflict became symbolic of larger tensions between authority and new knowledge. Yet even here the story resists simplification. Many churchmen supported scientific research. Many scientists remained devout believers. History prefers complexity over slogans. As global connections expanded, religious traditions increasingly encountered one another. Buddhist monks met Christian missionaries. Muslim scholars debated Jewish philosophers. Hindu thinkers engaged European intellectuals. Ideas crossed oceans almost as readily as merchants. Sometimes these meetings produced misunderstanding. Sometimes genuine admiration. Sometimes entirely new religious movements blending multiple influences. Culture is wonderfully porous. People borrow songs, foods, words, stories, even sacred ideas. The 18th century gradually approached. Empires stretched across continents. Trade enriched some while exploiting many others. Millions of Africans were forcibly carried across the Atlantic through the transatlantic slave trade. It remains one of history's greatest human tragedies. Religion appeared on every side of this terrible system. Some used scripture to defend slavery. Others used the very same scriptures to condemn it. Enslaved Africans preserved spiritual traditions despite unimaginable suffering. Many embraced Christianity while also preserving elements of older beliefs, creating rich new religious expressions that blended memory, resilience, and hope. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout history. People rarely receive religions passively. They interpret them, adapt them, live them through their own experiences. Faith changes people. People also change faith's expression. As the 18th century unfolds, another transformation quietly gathers strength. Philosophers begin asking whether reason alone might guide humanity toward a better future. Ancient authorities come under increasing scrutiny. Kings, churches, traditions. Nothing seems entirely beyond question anymore. Europe is entering the Enlightenment. And religion, for the first time in many centuries, will face perhaps its greatest intellectual challenge. Not from another religion, but from the growing confidence that human reason itself might illuminate the world without requiring sacred revelation. The conversation between faith and reason, begun long ago beneath the olive trees of Greece, is about to enter its boldest chapter yet. The age of reason, faith, doubt, and the search for a new world. Evening settles over Paris. Rain has just ended, leaving the narrow streets glistening beneath the soft glow of lanterns. Water drips slowly from stone balconies. Horse-drawn carriages rumble across uneven cobblestones while cafe windows spill warm light into the cool night. Inside one small coffeehouse, conversation refuses to sleep. Candles flicker over stacks of books. Ink stains the fingers of young writers. Philosophers lean across wooden tables, arguing with the enthusiasm of people absolutely convinced they have finally solved the universe. History, of course, smiles quietly. Because every generation believes it has solved the universe. And every generation discovers at least a few surprises waiting around the next century. Still, something extraordinary is happening. For thousands of years, religion had been the primary framework through which most societies understood existence. Where did humanity come from? Why are we here? How should we live? What happens after death? These questions were answered largely through sacred traditions. Now another voice enters the conversation with growing confidence. Reason. Observation. Experiment. Evidence. The Enlightenment was not a rebellion against every form of religion. Many of its leading thinkers remained believers. Rather, it challenged the idea that inherited authority alone should determine truth. A bold question echoed through Europe's universities, salons, and coffeehouses. What if we investigated everything? Kings. Question them. Governments. Examine them. Ancient customs. Test them. Even religion. Ask difficult questions. This was a revolutionary habit of mind. Imagine opening a dusty library. Shelves stretch from floor to ceiling. Ancient books sit beside newly printed volumes. For centuries, scholars often began with authority. What did Aristotle say? What did the church teach? Now increasing numbers began somewhere else. What does the evidence suggest? It was a subtle change. Yet it altered civilization. One of the movement's most influential voices was John Locke. Locke argued that governments existed to protect natural rights. Life. Liberty. Property. He also defended greater religious toleration than many earlier generations considered acceptable. His ideas would profoundly influence political thought on both sides of the Atlantic. Nearby in France, Voltaire sharpened his wit against intolerance. Voltaire criticized religious persecution with remarkable courage, and remarkable sarcasm. He possessed a talent for making powerful people deeply uncomfortable. History occasionally owes much to individuals willing to ask inconvenient questions. Voltaire did not oppose belief itself as much as fanaticism. He believed no one should be imprisoned, tortured, or executed simply for thinking differently. It sounds almost obvious today. It was anything but obvious then. Centuries of religious wars had convinced many thinkers that tolerance might be essential for peace. Not everyone agreed. Old habits rarely disappear gracefully. Meanwhile, Baruch Spinoza offered ideas so radical that they shocked many contemporaries. He questioned traditional understandings of Scripture, explored new approaches to God and nature, argued that freedom of thought benefited society rather than threatening it. For these views he faced exclusion and condemnation. Yet later generations would recognize him as one of the Enlightenment's most original minds. Throughout Europe, printing presses multiplied books at astonishing speed. Ideas spread faster than ever before. A controversial pamphlet could travel hundreds of miles within weeks. Governments struggled to control information. Churches struggled as well. Once people discovered they could compare different viewpoints, asking further questions became almost irresistible. Books have always been quietly dangerous things. They sit patiently upon shelves. Then one evening someone opens one. And the world changes. Religion itself began adapting. Some theologians embraced scientific discoveries. Others defended traditional teachings more vigorously. Still others sought harmony between faith and reason. Many argued that studying nature revealed the wisdom of its creator. After all, if the universe reflected divine order, then understanding that order could itself become an act of reverence. The relationship between science and religion proved less like a battlefield, and more like a long family conversation. Sometimes warm, sometimes frustrating, occasionally involving people who refused to speak to one another for years. Then came one of the greatest political earthquakes in history. In 1789, the French Revolution erupted. Crowds filled Paris. The Bastille fell. The old monarchy trembled. Liberty, equality, fraternity. These ideals inspired millions. They also unleashed forces almost no one fully controlled. Religion stood at the center of the storm. Many revolutionaries viewed the Catholic Church as closely tied to the old aristocratic order. Church lands were confiscated. Monasteries closed. Priests were required to swear loyalty to the new state. Some agreed. Others refused. Communities divided. Families argued. Neighbors suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of history. At the revolution's most radical stage, some leaders attempted something unprecedented. They tried replacing Christianity itself. New civic festivals honored reason. Churches became temples of reason. Ancient religious calendars were abandoned for entirely new systems. Even the measurement of time came under revision. Because apparently changing governments was not ambitious enough. History occasionally demonstrates that revolutionaries possess wonderfully unlimited confidence. The experiment did not last. Many ordinary people retained their faith despite political pressure. Eventually Napoleon Bonaparte restored a working relationship with the Catholic Church through the Concordat of 1801, though under new political realities. The lesson proved enduring. Governments could reshape institutions. Changing hearts was considerably more difficult. Across the Atlantic, another remarkable experiment unfolded. The newly independent United States adopted a different approach. Rather than establishing one national church, its constitution prohibited Congress from establishing a religion while protecting the free exercise of religion. This idea was historically unusual. Governments and official religions had often been closely connected. Now a different model emerged. Religious diversity protected by law. The reality remained imperfect. Discrimination certainly continued. Yet the principle itself influenced constitutional thinking around the world. Different faiths increasingly shared the same public space. Not because everyone agreed, but because peaceful disagreement became recognized as preferable to endless conflict. The 19th century brought still more change. Industrial cities expanded rapidly. Factories replaced farms. Millions left villages for crowded urban neighborhoods. Traditional religious communities struggled to adapt. Some churches focused on charity, building schools, hospitals, orphanages, soup kitchens. Others emphasized evangelism. Still others addressed workers' rights and economic injustice. Religion remained deeply involved in social questions. One remarkable example came from Britain. William Wilberforce, motivated by his Christian convictions, spent decades campaigning against the transatlantic slave trade. His struggle required extraordinary persistence. Year after year legislation failed. Year after year he returned. Eventually Parliament abolished the British slave trade in 1807 and slavery throughout most of the British Empire in 1833. Religion had been used to defend slavery. Here it also became one of the strongest arguments against it. History rarely grants any tradition a monopoly on virtue, or on failure. The same complexity appeared in the United States, where abolitionists such as Harriet Tubman drew profound strength from biblical faith while others cited scripture to justify slavery. Sacred texts themselves remained constant. Human interpretation differed dramatically. Perhaps this is one of history's quietest warnings. The greatest danger often lies not merely in what people believe, but in what they believe their beliefs permit them to do. As the 19th century progressed, new discoveries again challenged traditional understandings. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. Evolution by natural selection transformed biology. Many religious believers rejected the theory. Others gradually found ways to reconcile evolutionary science with faith. The debate continues into our own century. Yet even here, reality proved more varied than popular stereotypes suggest. Many scientists remained religious. Many clergy accepted scientific evidence. The conversation persisted rather than ending. Meanwhile, missionaries continued traveling throughout Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Sometimes they defended local communities from exploitation. Sometimes they became intertwined with colonial administrations. Sometimes both roles existed in the same individual. Human beings, frustratingly and beautifully, refused to fit neatly into categories. By the dawn of the 20th century, religion remained one of humanity's most powerful forces. Yet the modern world was changing at astonishing speed. Electric lights illuminated cities. Telegraphs crossed oceans. Automobiles replaced horses. Airplanes challenged gravity itself. Many believed science and technology would soon solve humanity's greatest problems. They imagined a future defined by progress, peace, reason, prosperity. History, however, had one more devastating lesson to teach. The century that produced remarkable scientific achievements would also produce wars of unimaginable destruction. And once again, religion would find itself wrestling with humanity's oldest questions. How do people preserve hope when the world itself seems to be breaking apart? That is where our story travels next, into the fires of the 20th century, where faith would be tested in ways few earlier generations could have imagined. Faith in the age of catastrophe, religion through the world wars and beyond. The year is 1914. A railway station somewhere in Europe hums with anxious energy. Steam billows from iron locomotives waiting beneath great glass roofs. Soldiers in freshly pressed uniforms embrace wives, parents, brothers, and children. Brass bands play patriotic marches that echo against stone walls. Flags wave above cheering crowds. Many believe the war will be over by Christmas. History knows better. The trains begin moving. Slowly at first. Then faster. No one standing on those crowded platforms can imagine that millions will never return. Or that the modern world is about to discover how terrifying industrial warfare can become. Religion has always accompanied humanity into war. Not because faith creates every conflict. It certainly does not. But because wherever human beings go, into fields, forests, deserts, oceans, hospitals, prisons, or battlefields, they carry their deepest hopes and fears with them. The First World War shattered old certainties. Machine guns transformed battle. Artillery reshaped entire landscapes. Poison gas drifted silently across trenches. For 4 terrible years, Europe became a continent of mud, smoke, and grief. Imagine a young soldier standing waist-deep in a trench after days of relentless rain. The walls drip constantly. Rats move through the darkness without fear. The smell of damp earth mixes with smoke and decay. Letters from home are folded carefully inside a uniform pocket. Nearby, a chaplain quietly walks from soldier to soldier. He offers prayers. Listens without judgment. Writes final letters for men too weak to hold a pen. He cannot stop the shells. He cannot end the war. Sometimes all he can offer is presence. And sometimes, during humanity's darkest moments, presence becomes its own form of mercy. Across every army, religious leaders served in similar ways. Christian chaplains. Jewish rabbis. Muslim imams. Others simply stood beside frightened young people trying to make sense of unimaginable violence. Faith often becomes quieter during catastrophe. Less interested in grand theories. More concerned with helping one more person survive another day. When the war finally ended in 1918, victory felt strangely hollow. Entire villages had lost a generation. Empires collapsed. Borders shifted. Millions mourned. Many people asked difficult questions. If civilization was truly progressing, how had it produced this? If God watched over humanity, why had so much suffering occurred? These questions echoed through churches, synagogues, mosques, and universities alike. No easy answers appeared. Then came another crisis. Economic collapse. Political instability. Fear. The conditions from which extremism often grows. During the 1930s, totalitarian ideologies expanded across parts of Europe and Asia. Some attempted to control religion. Others sought to replace it. The Soviet Union promoted official atheism, closing many churches, mosques, and synagogues while persecuting numerous religious communities. The goal was not merely political control. It was also ideological transformation. Religion, authorities argued, belonged to the past. History had other plans. Despite decades of repression, many believers quietly continued practicing their faith. Sometimes in secret. Sometimes at enormous personal risk. Ideas carried in the human heart often prove remarkably difficult to confiscate. Meanwhile, in Germany, Adolf Hitler rose to power. The relationship between Nazism and Christianity remains deeply complicated. Some Christians supported the regime. Some resisted courageously. Many struggled uneasily somewhere in between. It is tempting to divide history into heroes and villains neatly separated from one another. Reality is more unsettling. Ordinary people often face impossible choices under oppressive governments. Some choose courage. Some choose compromise. Some remain silent. The Holocaust stands among history's greatest horrors. Approximately 6 million Jews were systematically murdered alongside millions of other victims targeted by the Nazi regime. The catastrophe transformed Jewish history forever. Imagine the silence after liberation. Synagogues emptied. Communities erased. Libraries destroyed. Generations vanished. Faith itself became a painful question. How does one pray after such loss? Some survivors found deeper belief. Others found only silence. Many wrestled with both for the rest of their lives. History cannot answer that question. Only those who lived through such darkness could attempt it. Amid this horror emerged remarkable examples of moral courage. Dietrich Bonhoeffer opposed Nazi ideology despite enormous personal danger. Eventually arrested, he was executed only weeks before the war ended. His writings continue challenging readers today. Not because they offer easy comfort, but because they ask difficult questions about conscience, responsibility, and courage. Another remarkable figure was Maximilian Kolbe, who volunteered to die in place of another prisoner at Auschwitz. Acts like these remind us that even amid extraordinary evil, extraordinary compassion remains possible. Not inevitable, but possible. Meanwhile, beyond Europe, religious communities experienced war differently. Across Asia, Buddhist temples, Shinto shrines, churches, and mosques found themselves navigating occupation, nationalism, and conflict. In Japan, state Shinto became closely connected with imperial ideology before the war. After Japan's defeat, that official relationship changed dramatically. Again we see religion interacting with political power in ways both creative and dangerous. After 1945, humanity faced another extraordinary moment. The world had witnessed atomic bombs, concentration camps, cities reduced to rubble. The question became unavoidable. How could such destruction be prevented from happening again? Religious leaders increasingly joined conversations about human rights, reconciliation, and international peace. The newly formed United Nations reflected hopes that dialogue might replace endless warfare. Imperfectly. Certainly. But sincerely. One of the 20th century's most influential religious voices emerged from India. Mahatma Gandhi had already demonstrated something astonishing. Drawing upon Hindu traditions, Jain principles of nonviolence, and respect for multiple religions, Gandhi challenged one of history's largest empires without building a conventional army. His philosophy of ahimsa, nonviolence, became a global inspiration. It was not passive surrender. It required immense discipline. To refuse hatred while resisting injustice may be among humanity's most difficult achievements. Gandhi influenced another young leader across the ocean. Martin Luther King Jr., a Baptist minister, combined Christian theology with Gandhian nonviolence during the American Civil Rights Movement. Imagine standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., during the summer of 1963. Thousands gather peacefully beneath the open sky. King speaks not of revenge, not of domination, but of justice, equality, hope. His famous dream drew strength from both scripture and democratic ideals. Religion here became not a justification for oppression, but a language for liberation. At nearly the same time, another significant development unfolded within the Catholic Church. The Second Vatican Council, held between 1962 and 1965, encouraged dialogue with other Christian traditions, other religions, and the modern world. Services increasingly appeared in local languages rather than exclusively in Latin. Relations with Judaism improved significantly. Conversations once considered impossible gradually became possible. The 20th century also witnessed growing interfaith dialogue. After centuries of suspicion, leaders from different religions increasingly met not as enemies but as partners seeking common ground. Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, and many others. They discovered disagreements remained. Profound disagreements. Yet cooperation proved possible nonetheless. Disaster relief, education, healthcare, poverty reduction, peace building, Shared humanity occasionally proved stronger than inherited division. Of course, conflict did not disappear. Religious identity continued intersecting with nationalism, ethnicity, and politics in places ranging from Northern Ireland to the Middle East, from South Asia to the Balkans. Some conflicts were described as religious. Closer examination usually revealed far more complicated causes. Land, history, colonial borders, economic inequality, political power. Religion often became one thread within a much larger tapestry. The old lesson returned once again. Human history resists simple explanations. As the 20th century closed, globalization accelerated. Air travel connected continents within hours. Television entered living rooms. The internet soon followed. For the first time in history, millions could encounter dozens of religious traditions without leaving home. Knowledge became astonishingly accessible. Misunderstanding occasionally became just as accessible. The modern world would inherit all the wisdom of previous generations, along with all their unfinished arguments. The conversation between faith and reason, tradition and change, identity and coexistence was far from over. In many ways, it had only entered a new chapter. And that chapter belongs not only to history, but to us. One planet, many faiths, the ongoing story of belief, conflict, and peace. The Earth is quiet from space. There are no borders visible from orbit. No kingdoms. No empires. No walls. Only deep blue oceans swirling beneath white clouds, brown deserts stretching toward distant mountains, forests breathing quietly beneath the changing seasons, and thousands of cities glowing gently as darkness moves across the planet. It is a strangely peaceful view. From this distance, humanity appears wonderfully united. Only when we return to the ground do we remember how complicated life truly is. A church bell rings in Rome. The call to prayer rises over Cairo. Temple bells echo through Kyoto. Incense drifts across a Buddhist monastery in Thailand. A synagogue welcomes worshippers in Jerusalem. A Sikh Gurdwara prepares free meals for anyone who walks through its doors. Somewhere deep in the Amazon rainforest, indigenous elders continue ceremonies practiced long before written history. Elsewhere, someone sits quietly beside a window, believing in no religion at all, yet searching for meaning beneath the same stars. The 21st century has brought humanity closer together than ever before. Never in history have so many different religions lived side by side. Never have so many people been able to learn about another faith with a few moments of reading or conversation. Never has misunderstanding been so easy to correct. And strangely, never has misunderstanding spread so quickly. Technology connects us. Human nature still complicates everything. Religion today is no longer confined to particular regions. Islam flourishes from Morocco to Indonesia. Christianity spans every inhabited continent. Hindu traditions have spread far beyond India. Buddhist communities exist across Europe and the Americas. Jewish communities continue preserving ancient traditions while contributing to modern societies around the world. Millions identify as spiritual without belonging to formal religious institutions. Others identify as secular or non-religious while still engaging deeply with ethical questions once discussed primarily through faith. The conversation has become global. Imagine walking through an international airport. Around you are hundreds of travelers. Some quietly finger prayer beads. Others wear crosses. Some carry small prayer rugs folded neatly into backpacks. Others wear turbans. Some wear no visible symbol at all. Each carries invisible stories. Childhood memories. Family traditions. Questions. Doubts. Hopes. Every traveler believes something about life. Even uncertainty becomes its own kind of journey. One of the most remarkable developments of the modern era has been the growth of interfaith dialogue. After centuries in which religious communities often viewed one another primarily through suspicion, increasing numbers of leaders have chosen conversation instead. Imagine a round table. Around it sit a rabbi, an imam, a priest, a Buddhist monk, a Hindu scholar, a Sikh leader. Perhaps a humanist philosopher joins them as well. They do not pretend their beliefs are identical. That would be dishonest. Instead, they ask a different question. How do we live together despite genuine differences? It is one of the most important questions humanity has ever attempted to answer. Some of history's greatest tragedies emerged when people assumed difference itself was dangerous. Some of history's greatest achievements emerged when difference became an opportunity for learning. The answer, it seems, has always depended less upon theology than upon humility. Throughout the modern world, religious communities remain among the largest providers of education, healthcare, disaster relief, and charitable assistance. When earthquakes strike, mosques open their doors. Churches become shelters. Temples prepare food. Synagogues organize volunteers. Sikh communities establish enormous community kitchens serving anyone regardless of religion, nationality, or background. The Sikh tradition of langar, the free communal meal, quietly demonstrates a profound idea. If people eat together, perhaps they become less likely to hate one another. History could probably benefit from more shared meals and fewer battle plans. Of course, religion continues appearing within political conflicts. Sometimes sincerely. Sometimes symbolically. Sometimes because leaders discover religious identity can unite supporters remarkably effectively. The headlines often describe such conflicts as ancient religious hatreds. Reality is almost always more complicated. Land disputes. Historical grievances. Economic inequality. Colonial borders. Ethnic identity. Nationalism. Political ambition. Religion may become one powerful thread woven through the larger fabric. But rarely is it the only thread. Historians have learned to be cautious whenever someone insists history has only one cause. Human beings are simply too complicated for that. The events of September 11, 2001, profoundly shaped global conversations about religion. Extremists claiming to act in the name of Islam carried out horrific terrorist attacks that killed thousands of innocent people. The consequences rippled across the world. Fear grew. Wars followed. Communities experienced suspicion and discrimination. It also became increasingly important to distinguish between extremist violence and the beliefs of the overwhelming majority of Muslims, who rejected those attacks. One of history's recurring lessons is that judging millions of people by the actions of a violent few almost always leads to further injustice. The same lesson applies across every religion. Indeed, across every ideology. Faith continues inspiring extraordinary acts of peace. Around the world, religious leaders mediate ceasefires, protect refugees, advocate for environmental stewardship, support education for girls, care for the elderly, visit prisoners, feed the hungry, comfort the dying. Most of these stories never appear on front pages. Peace rarely attracts headlines with the same enthusiasm as catastrophe. Yet quietly, every day, countless people perform acts of compassion because their beliefs call them toward service. History remembers kings. The world is often sustained by ordinary volunteers. Science, too, continues evolving. Astronomers peer deeper into the universe than ever before. Biologists unlock the mysteries of genetics. Artificial intelligence begins reshaping daily life. Questions once reserved for philosophers suddenly become practical. What does it mean to be human? Can intelligence exist without consciousness? How should powerful technologies be used ethically? Religion remains part of these conversations. So do philosophy and science. Perhaps humanity never truly graduates from asking ancient questions. We simply ask them with more sophisticated tools. Young people today inherit a world unlike anything their ancestors imagined. A teenager in Nairobi can discuss Buddhism with a friend in Seoul. A student in Sao Paulo can read the Bhagavad Gita, the Bible, the Quran, the Tao Te Ching, and modern philosophy on the same device. Knowledge has become astonishingly democratic. Wisdom remains as challenging as ever. The greatest challenge facing our century may not be deciding which religion is correct. History has debated that for millennia. The greater challenge may be learning how people with profoundly different convictions can build peaceful societies together. Civilizations have attempted this before. Some succeeded briefly. Some failed tragically. The experiment continues. And perhaps that brings us to the deepest lesson hidden within our long journey through history. Religion has never been only about gods, or temples, or sacred books. It has always been about people. People searching for meaning. People grieving those they love. People celebrating births. People fearing death. People hoping justice matters. People wondering whether compassion is stronger than cruelty. Those questions belong to everyone, whether religious or not. As our long night together begins drawing toward its close, the fires burning before ancient temples have grown into cathedral candles, mosque lanterns, monastery lamps, synagogue lights, and the quiet glow of countless homes where ordinary people continue asking extraordinary questions. Empires have vanished. Languages have changed. Kings have become footnotes. Yet the search itself continues. Because somewhere tonight, just as thousands of years ago, someone looks up at the stars. Someone whispers a prayer. Someone asks a question. Someone sits quietly in silence. And above them all, the same ancient sky stretches patiently across the world, holding every hope, every doubt, every song, every argument, every act of forgiveness, and every dream humanity has ever carried. Perhaps history has never really been the story of religion alone. Perhaps it has always been the story of humanity reaching into the darkness, hoping that, somehow, something greater than fear is reaching back. The night grows quieter. The wind softens. The last candle flickers gently. And as sleep slowly finds us, history leaves one final thought behind. Every civilization eventually fades. Every empire eventually falls. But kindness has never belonged to just one religion. It belongs to every generation willing to choose it. Good night.